Hello and welcome back to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Advisory Committee meeting agenda today. This is the second day. For those of you just joining us, there's a tech support button above the video player if you have any tech support issues, and there will be a complete archive of all the video here at the FRRCC website. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tom McDonald. Tom?
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. Well, welcome back, committee. We are fixing to begin discussing the third and final charge topic, and that is creating a holistic pesticide program. The ad hoc work group chairman for this topic is Lauren Lurkins, and she's also vice chair of our FRRCC committee. So at this time, Lauren, I will turn it over to you and let you give the report out of the pesticide work group.
All right, thank you, Chairman McDonald. Last but not least, we have, I think we saved the best for last, actually, the pesticide issue. I just want to thank the chairman as well as Rebecca and all of the staffers at EPA who have helped us along the way, as well as our ad hoc work group committee members on this particular topic. So for me personally, and I think many on our work group would echo this, it's been incredibly beneficial to hear the viewpoints from across our country, as well as the different sectors of agriculture on all the issues that we've been addressing, but about to dig into pesticides as well. And then also to hear so far the deep dive into the issues from an EPA perspective or some of the professionals that we've heard from as well. So we have a tremendous amount of respect out of the work group for the work that US EPA does on pesticides. And I think that is coming through loud and clear in what we're going to hear. And we hope that we have invited speakers in for the rest of the committee to also as well as the ad hoc work group to learn just as much as we have along the way. But we think that there's going to have to be this connection, obviously now and into the future, as we look toward how we're going to work, continue to work between agriculture and the agency into the future. And over again, we hear, and we've heard it on all these topics, of the concept of certainty. We hear it certainly in the state of Illinois with the growers that we represent with regard to pesticide products. So again, we're kind of looking at this through the viewpoint of learning today a little bit more about the role of EPA and also USDA. But I want to tell you a little bit about what the work group has done. We did meet one time on October 12th, and we discussed there's a great amount of knowledge and experience in the area of pesticide law, regulation, and use on the farm in the work group committee. So we spent quite a bit of time hearing from the ad hoc work committee members on what they have experienced and what they've been doing. We reviewed our work group charge and a couple of the questions, and we discussed that charge. We were looking at the charge and thinking about, consistent with the chairman's request, that we look at, what kind of clarification do we need from US EPA? What sort of speakers would help us aid us in our deliberation? And what could we lend to this next committee here of the full committee meeting to be able to help all of us kind of dissect this pretty complicated aspect of the charge that has a lot kind of wrapped into one topic. And then with this viewpoint of what is most important for the agricultural community that's represented in this committee to be telling to EPA or to be recommending to EPA. And so that's kind of where we were trying to head with our discussion back in October. Just a reminder for everybody, like I said, there's a little bit to unpackage in the charge with regard to pesticides, just like we have in all of the other topics that we've been covering over the last couple of days. But you will remember that the work group charge that was given to us was to create a holistic pesticide program of the future. And I just want to remind everybody, so we're in that same frame of mind, the same frame of mind that the work group has been in. But we are looking at those crop protection tools that are vital to the U.S. agriculture's ability to provide the food, fiber, and fuel to the U.S. and the world. We know that there's a lot of advancements and innovations in crop protection technology that will allow our farmers across the country to gain efficiency and produce our ag products with less resources. We also have to be looking at the role of the pesticide program of the future as it incorporates our integrated pest management, examine of new active ingredients, plant incorporated protectants, and biotechnology. So we're also looking at the role that EPA plays in being responsible for actually registering these products and active ingredients, establishing tolerances for the pesticide residues in food, and regulating our pesticide disposal. So the agency in and of itself actually touches pesticides in quite a few different ways. And they also partner with agencies in states and U.S. territories to be able to regulate the pesticides. And responsible for pesticide regulation in Indian country. So it's much like the dynamic with our water, where we have federal level regulation and policy, and then we all as stakeholders across the state can see that sort of go through the state veil or the territory veil, wherever we're coming from. So we are looking and trying to break up this very large charge into a couple of areas. And the first is really looking at how EPA can reduce barriers to bring those crop protection tools to market, while at the same time balancing and protecting the environment, our natural resources and human health, as well as safeguarding our pollinators and endangered species. That's something that we want to hear more from the speakers that we've invited us today to explain currently how they are doing that. Before we are able to weigh in with a real set of pretty robust recommendations on what they could do better. The second charge question is, how can EPA improve the consumer confidence and build trust with the American public related to pesticides? And I think even from the committee's first discussion on this topic, I think it was even Beth who said, how do we know that they aren't? And so I think we still have to understand what EPA does to communicate to the public, how they run their public relations on products that are frankly pretty hard to put into layman's terms and to even pronounce in some settings. So we need to kind of hear how they're already approaching that and how we would figure out whether we are looking at success or not. And then the third big component is how can EPA build trust with our international trading partners with regard to pesticides? Much of the discussion to date has really been in those top two discussion points, but we will be spending some time, hopefully today, hearing from our speakers on that trade component as well. And before I finish, I just want to make sure that you all are aware of some of the questions that were raised by the work group, kind of picking up from where our conversation left off with the full group the last time. But there was discussion within the group on whether EPA should and can get into the public relations business with regard to promoting pesticides. Questions about the role and the amount of resources that exist at a federal agency to be able to do that. So sort of walking that line between being the regulatory agency and really dealing with some very complicated technology and complicated process, but also making sure that the public understands the process and the products that are going through the process. They want to make sure that we know, again, revisiting that point of resources. I feel like we've talked about resources quite a bit, as is expected when you deal with public agencies. But if you're going to do the job of communicating to consumers and the public, there was a sentiment from the work group that is going to take time, and it is going to take resources and personnel to do it correctly. And so do they have the resources to be able to do that? There's also some discussion in the work group on building trust with international partners. How does that happen today? how would it be envisioned in the future that those conversations happen and that the data is collected, particularly with regard to the MRLs. There was discussion from some of the knowledge within the work group on USDA resources from Congress for EPA, USDA, and FDA to do more with regard to discussions and promotion around biotechnology. So there were some questions on what happened to those resources, how were they spent, what came about of that, and what should this committee learn from the work and the investment that's been in this space of the biotechnology angle with regard to pesticides to date. And then an overarching sentiment, because obviously our full committee and our work group is comprised of a lot of individual farmer and producer input, is that our farmers across the country, whether you grow row crops or specialty crop, or you're looking at it from a livestock perspective, we're the end users of the products that go through the FIFRA registration process. However, the way that process is structured, there's not an official role always for the farmers and the end users, particularly on the products where you get a variety of viewpoints. And some of them are passionate variety of viewpoints on particular products. So kind of discussions on making sure that our farming community across the country is aware of the process and maybe even has a chance to be part of the process. And so kind of unpackaging that a little bit. So again, the general feeling of the ad hoc work group was that before we can move into really digging a little bit deeper to the second layer of a lot of these work, we really need to take time and hear directly from the agencies on what is happening today. And we actually are pretty excited to have USDA represented in this discussion as well. It's pretty fascinating that the interaction that already happens between agencies, it's very positive, and we want to kind of pick that apart and hear from Cheryl in a moment. But we really need to hear a little bit more about how business operates today before we can offer some pretty constructive thoughts on what to do better. So that is why we have invited our speakers that you're going to hear from. And then we hope that we can be able to really dissect that, those three buckets, reducing barriers, the consumer confidence, and the trading partners when we are done. So with that, I will turn it over to the chairman and we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Very good report out from the work group. And I see our first speaker is with us. Our first speaker on the pesticide topic is Dr. Cheryl Kanikas. She is the director of the USDA Office of Pest Management Policy. She represents USDA's interest in the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act related to matters, and is the USDA representative on EPA's Pesticide Program Dialogue Committee. She previously served as acting director in the Office of the Chief Scientist and director of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Remote Sensing Laboratories. She also served a one-year detail at the White House Council on Environmental Quality as the Deputy Assistant Director for Agriculture, Lands, and Wildlife. So Dr. Kanikas, with that, I'll turn the program over to you.
Okay, I'm going to just say what I hate to hear. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. That's
okay, fine. Good. So this is always lots of fun. I love talking with groups, and I certainly appreciate the invitation to be with all of you today. This is the first time I've talked to such a large group from my home office. Let me just warn you that it's very possible a dog will bark. You might hear my husband yell up the stairs. Or incredibly, my teleworking neighbor has decided to do sanding right outside my window. So hopefully none of you will hear that. Anyhow, like I said, thank you for including me today. I did listen into the last meeting of the committee and was most interested to know that you're interested in how we do how we work with EPA on pesticides. Let me just say straight up, we have a terrific relationship with the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Pesticide Programs. They're incredibly important partners for agriculture, and we work hand in hand with them every single day. So let me just tell you a little about me. I've been with USDA in about a week and a half. I will have served the public for 32 years. I started my career with the Soil Conservation Service, then the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and then for about 21 years, and then I became the director in the Office of Pest Management Policy in 2010. Our office works under, at least my position works under the direction of the secretary. Our office is authorized under the Farm Bill. So, but our office is actually housed in the Office of the Chief Economist. So why were we established? Let me just tell you right now. Many, many years ago, as EPA was putting out decisions, it was felt that USDA's or agriculture's interests were not being represented very well. You all know that we have lots and lots of data on the bigger crops, corn, soybeans, cotton, etc. But a lot of the specialty crops where there's very small acreages, very, very small acreages, etc., they didn't feel very strong that they were getting their voice heard. And so a number of folks went to the Hill, I guess, this is what I hear, and they established in a Farm Bill in the late 90s, the Office of Pest Management Policy. So every Farm Bill, we hold our breath and hope that Congress reauthorizes us. So we've been very successful. I've been here for, like I said, 10 years, now 10 and a half, I believe. And, when I first came to this office, we weren't very well known. I worked in pesticides in my past part of my life, and I know that for American agriculture to be able to produce food, forestry, and all the things that we do, there's got to be some type of pest management. It doesn't matter if you're growing organic, conventional, you're interested in biotech, all crops have some sort of pest management that's required. Everybody uses pesticides, whether they like the word or not, but it is true. Anyway, we were established, and I came into this in 2010, and it became very clear to me that I didn't think we were doing a very good, I don't want to say we weren't doing a good job, we just weren't well represented. We didn't have we had missing staff. For example, we had no entomologists on our staff when we started. And that's kind of key, that we have someone that can do entomology and that understands insecticides. So I started building up our staff. So I feel very strongly that in agriculture, the folks that we have on our team are absolutely essential, and all disciplines are represented. I also feel very strongly that our office represents agriculture, so I need the very best people. And we're working for the Secretary's office, so I feel like we've got to have the best scientists that can do the work in a short notice, et cetera. So on our staff, I've hired a human health risk assessor, an ecological risk assessor. We have a plant pathologist, an agronomist or weed scientist. We have an entomologist. We also have a biologist, an ag economist, administrative officer, and a biotechnology coordinator. The person that handles the biotech across the department for USDA is housed in my office. That position is currently vacant, and that will be advertised pretty soon. So I have staff that fill these positions. Some of them are listening today. I'll just tell you, I tell them all the time, they're all rock and roll stars. They really are dedicated to agriculture. They go the extra mile in doing outreach to stakeholders to make sure we can very, very well represent the interests of growers on how they do their work. So what do they do at USDA? So I will get to EPA soon, but I just want you folks to understand all the different things that we do in addition to working with EPA. We support the Foreign Ag Service, and I know I just heard the reference to trade. So a lot of times they reach out to us. We work with them on the MRLs. We assist them with technical information. We have reviewed some of their pesticide briefing papers and other documents, mostly because we want to make sure we're all on the same side. They were very much involved in working with other countries on some of the big chemicals that we all will recognize. For example, glyphosate, that's a big deal. And it has a lot of implications when foreign countries eliminate pest control products, because then it affects how we can do our trade and what kind of produce, et cetera, that we can send overseas and so forth. We work with the Pesticide Data Program, which many of you may know. EPA, USDA and EPA work together and PDP, USDA, they work with the states also to collect random samples of different crops, fruits and vegetables, other things, and they sample them to see what kind of residues on them. And I'm always glad that every year we get back that report, and well over 90, I'll say 99% of what they've tested is below tolerance. So that means farmers are doing a fantastic job with using pest control products. And as well as that, FDA puts out a report which shows the same thing. They showed that in Europe, and they show that in California in their report. So you can see that for the most part, pesticide products are used at the levels that are required. On occasion, there is something above tolerance, or a product that's used that's not legally used, and so we can identify that whatever it is, and we can reach out and work with that group to make sure they understand what pesticides can be used on their crops and so forth. We also work with the NASS, which is the National Ag Statistics Service. They're doing data collection. I know you know about the chemical use surveys. And for those farmers out there, I'm sure you get those calls or those knocks on your door from NASS, and they want to ask you a lot of questions. And I'm very aware that many don't want to take the time to do that because they don't know why that's important. Well, let me just tell you that data that they collect is extremely important. We use that information to help defend what agriculture does. So we actually are funding, my office is funding, or the Office of the Chief Economist is funding NASS to add questions to the survey so we can help understand how you're doing, what you're doing with regard to resistance management, what kind of practices are involved with regard to pollinators, other types of critters. And then also about spray drift. What kind of nozzles do you even understand? I know you understand, but the implications of not changing nozzles and that. So we funded NASS to be able to add those questions to surveys. We're on year 3 of getting those questions that we've asked different questions on a variety of crops, both fruits and vegetables. So if you do get a knock on that door, please, please, please answer those questions to the best of your ability, because those questions do, the answers come back to us, and it helps us to inform EPA on the practices that you guys all use for to be able to produce America's food. We also work with NRCS on their conservation practice standards. We've been through quite a last couple of years, 3 years, working with them on their integrated pest management practice standard. We work with them on resistance management and so forth. So I can list through probably all of the USDA agencies where we have a role. But at USDA, when it comes to pesticides, the department recognizes our office as I would say, the authority on pesticides. So we also respond to the Office of the Secretary and the Office of the Chief Economist and the Office of General Counsel. Because you can imagine when you open the newspaper and you read something about, oh my goodness, chlorpyrifos is here, or glyphosate's here, or this is with dicamba, they want to know right away, what do you think? And so we're able to provide an opinion about it, look at the study, determine whether or not it's valid or not, and then provide advice. The chief economist is always interested in what kind of implications not having pest management tools, say in foreign countries, might have on imports and that. So we will answer questions such as that. And then the Office of General Counsel, actually, I'll be very frank, it's usually EPA's Office of General Counsel that we're working with to defend agriculture. So in the past 4 years, I will say we have provided declarations describing how agriculture uses pest control products or certain chemicals, and what would happen if those were suddenly taken from the market. And so we have to correct some of the assumptions that some folks have, and so we've done that in writing. So we've sworn to before the court and we've supported EPA. So those are the kind of things we do at any given time. So we also serve on committees and we work on different issues. And this is all in addition to the work we do with EPA, such as antibiotic resistance, which many of you will know is extremely important. I was surprised to learn just about 4 years ago that there's a sector of America that doesn't know that we use antibiotics for plant production. It's absolutely essential if we're going to grow certain fruit trees in this country. It can't be done without uses of certain antibiotics. And so we wrote the section, or at least our plant pathologists and some of our team wrote the section on the use of why we use antibiotics for plant production. It's not just for animal production, which is also very important. You know, USDA had the responsibility of implementing this hemp rule. So we're part of an interagency group dealing with hemp, and our focus is on the pesticides that are needed for the production of hemp. We work on the spotted wing Drosophila work group, a brown marmorated stink bug work group. There's the invasive species, which is incredibly important for different reasons across the country. And if it involves pest management, I can almost guarantee you somebody on my staff is involved. We also are responsible for coordinating the federal IPM coordinating committee. Secretary Veneman from a few years ago, Ann Veneman, committed that our office would take the lead on that. And that was part of a GAO audit, I guess, on integrated pest management. So we convene all the federal agencies, not just at USDA, but this includes Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Commerce, Interior, I can tell you Department of Labor, Department of Defense. So we bring all those folks together quarterly to discuss IPM and talk about what we all have in common and how we're dealing with certain issues. So now let's get to FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So if you've ever taken the time to read that, which is, it's a fairly, I won't say it's as long as some documents you can read, you will see in there that in FIFRA, the administrator of EPA is required to consult with the Secretary of Agriculture in different portions or different parts of FIFRA. And there's a number of places, and you can, if you look at it online, you can find all those sections. But the Secretary of Ag, he's very busy. And so he has, what we have in every agency are delegations of authority, because this secretary can't do everything that's under his purview. So that delegation of authority goes to the chief economist, Dr. Rob Johansson, and that authority has been delegated to me. So anything that comes out under FIFRA, I can speak for the secretary on that. I do all the work for the secretary. Of course, I do consult with them, but I'm responsible for that. So what's most important is that we really work on with EPA under FIFRA is that when EPA puts out rules, so there's proposed rules and there's final rules, and there's a very, I'll say, stringent outline of what happens. So I'm going to give an example because I think many of you might recognize this, the worker protection standards and the certification and training rules that came out. The proposed rule first came out in 2013 for the worker protection standards. So here's what happens. Under FIFRA, and we will call this a FIFRA review, EPA will put out a proposed rule and they will send it only to USDA. USDA, it comes to me, and what I do is I convene agencies across USDA, and we'll review the rule, and we'll make recommendations or comments. We'll correct it or do whatever, and we'll raise questions or point out where they've missed something or said that it's very good. So EPA will take that document, and we cannot share it outside of USDA, but I must point out under FIFRA, EPA also sends that rule to Congress as well as to their science advisory panel. So 3 groups get it. It is not for the public or any other agencies at that point. So I will send back our comments to EPA. They'll revise it or do something with it, but maybe not. Depends what they think of our comments. Then they'll send it to the Office of Management and Budget, where OMB will conduct an intergovernment review that's done so all the federal agencies will get to review it. So at this point, so it was worker protection, for example, Department of Labor looked at it, DOD, Department of Interior, everybody who's got an interest in it reviews it, makes comments, OMB gives it to EPA. They can make revisions or not. And then it goes out to the public. So that's when the public gets it and everybody gets all kind of flipped out over what EPA has proposed. We're not surprised usually. It's very interesting. It's a very complicated, those were very complicated rules. And also I should mention, there's also an economic analysis that goes out with each of the rules. And so in FIFRA, EPA, USDA is required to look at the economic impact to American agriculture. So we get to do that also, and I'm going to tell you why that's important. So on this worker protection, they sent so EPA got it back. It went out for public comment. So when they get it back after about 60 to 90 days, depending if there's an extension, then EPA takes the time to review it, think about what the public said, and others, anybody who wants to comment can comment. And then after they revise it, then they send it back to USDA. We get a crack at that to review it. And this is under the final proposed rule. This is really important because what we'll do is look at what the ag groups have what issues were a real concern for them. And we can reiterate that back to EPA. And we'll send it back to EPA. This time, the first time we got it, we had 30 days to review it. This time we only have 15 days. I'll send it back to EPA. Then they will send it to, I believe this is correct, they'll send it to OMB for interagency review, and then it goes final. And we, USDA, are part of interagency review, so we get, this is our last crack at it. So we really work very hard to try and make sure it works for agriculture. So we get some good looks at it before in many different places, and we take that role the FIFRA review very seriously. It also helps EPA to put out a much better document if it impacts ag, we've got to look at it first. On the certification and training rule, I will say there were a lot of issues with it when we first read it. EPA did a terrific job in correcting, I won't say correcting, listening to the stakeholders and revising that. On one other rule that they sent out, and I won't say which one it was, we were able to do an economic analysis and look, and we felt strongly that we thought the benefits did not outweigh the cost. So that's always a challenge on how an administration will look at that. But anyhow, those rules, that's how we work with them under FIFRA. So in every spring and every fall, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, puts out what's called the regulatory agenda. And if you ever are interested in any of that, you can go into their website and look, and you can see what kinds of things the agencies are going to do. So we always look at EPA to see what kind of rules, what's on their agenda for the next several months or the next several years. It may be several years off, but we are always looking at that. We look at what the Office of Pesticide Programs is planning to do. We also look at what the Office of Air and Radiation is going to do, because they also have oversee the Clean Air Act, which is also covered, our fumigants that we use are also subject to the Clean Air Act. So we're pretty busy. So that it kind of gives us an idea of how busy we're going to be on rules, etc. So so now that's on rules and that. So now after we finished all that, some of those rules are not complicated. Some of them are extremely detailed, very difficult, and it takes years to get them through. Others are as simple as they're just making clarifying language. They're getting in step with, say, something OSHA's put out, and I can waive review of that, and then EPA can go ahead and get it out for publication. We don't need to take 3, 4, 5 years to get a rule completed. So now let's talk about our day-to-day work with the EPA. Ed Messina, who's the acting director of OPP, the Office of Pesticide Programs, will be following me, and he's likely to tell you about this huge deadline that EPA has facing them in the very soon. And I'll leave it for him to discuss what it is, but it's keeping not only EPA busy, but it's keeping us busy. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, stakeholders have ensured reauthorization of each farm bill for our office. So when I first got to OPMP in 2010, we basically got nothing from EPA to review. And I did have one staff that was always saying, oh, EPA is going to start sending stuff. And I'm like, yeah. They never did. And then all of a sudden, EPA started dropping risk assessments in some shape or form every single quarter, anywhere from 20 to 40, I'd say, each quarter. That's why my staff has really been bumped up. I've really made sure we have a very full suite of disciplines so that we can very adequately review them. So they're keep us really busy. This is what's called registration review. So EPA there's a requirement for them to review every pesticide that they registered at least every 15 years, sooner if there's any concern. So it's really keeping us busy. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, EPA dropped on the public, including us, about 20, I'll say, risk assessments. I won't go through all of the different types that they do. We had a deadline from a previous drop that they did last Monday, and then the Friday they dropped another round for us. So our staff is busy writing. We virtually, we review virtually every single thing that EPA puts out. And I'm not kidding on that. We are so busy. Sometimes, so for example, big ticket issues or pesticides that have a lot of attention, such as glyphosate or atrazine, chlorpyrifos, some of the others, EPA will put those out independently because they know there's going to be a lot of public comment, a lot of interest. So we also have those kind of risk assessments that have come out that we review. Now, one thing I want to, and it just has always kind of bothered me, and I understand why, but working with EPA, it's very clear. The EPA has a very strong science group. The career staff that they have working for them know their business. And it really bothers me that the general public has no idea of the amount of work and effort that goes in, the science that goes into the work that they do. A great example, in 2013, EPA registered a product called Enlist Duo. They did an amazing rollout with that. I wish all of America could have listened. It was a 2-hour workshop. In that workshop, they presented how they did the human health risk assessment, how they did the ecological risk assessment. They talked about how they did the worker exposures. They talked about how they put in conservatism for pregnant women and children or infants. They talked about the safety factors that went into it. They talked about the endangered species, how they went and did the ESA component of that. It was amazing. If you were just somebody who stopped by and listened to that, you would think, wow, what EPA does is scientifically very valid. The conservatism that's used is put in there for the safety so that folks can use those products following the label safely. And I can say that none of us at USDA would ever support any kind of language or any kind of effort if it wasn't, let's say, didn't have the safety factors built in to protect those people that use those products or those people who work around those products. We are very, very careful about that. They do a terrific work, and I just wish more people knew about what they do. They have a huge workload. The science is complex, and it takes a lot of time. Some folks will say it takes years for it to come through, to get it out. And that's true. It does take years. And I can't believe that the worker protection standards, I said we started them in 2013, and here it is in 2020. And they just finally finalized a component of WPS just about 2 weeks ago when the administrator announced the AEZ, which is the Ag Exclusion Zone, which was a big deal for farmers. And a number of folks went to bat for that, and we were able to get that through. But that took many, many years to get that finished. But does EPA always get it right? Now, like I said, they've got a huge workload, as do we. So, but do they always get it right? No, they don't. But none of us always get something right. So it's our job, as we look at all of these documents that EPA puts out, is to review them. It might be as simple as just not getting inputs into a model, needing them to be better refined, or not understanding how a mint grower, for example, is doing something with his crop, or when they need to apply something, or why they would need to apply something, or the timing of when the pest is there and why they would need to have that. So EPA will send over our office. They do a number of questions in which our office reaches out to the agricultural community, the different commodity groups, the different specialty crop groups. We reach out to Extension, the Integrated Pest Management Centers. There's 4 of those across the country. We work with lots of different scientists, a lot of people on the ground, a lot of people who work with agriculture to make sure we can get the best answers we can to get that to EPA, so that the mitigations that growers have to incur to be able to continue to use those products safely are based on the most correct information possible. So one thing, let me just tell you a couple of things, and I will be straight. Yesterday, we met with EPA. We had a virtual meeting. It was pretty fun. We try to do that once a month. It was a fantastic meeting, I will say. And we did thank EPA. So I know some people will say we've been at odds with EPA, and I will just say we have a great working relationship with EPA. And they listened to us on some things. And yesterday it was pointed out that we appreciated that they used our input. If you read their response to comments in that, or they will point out that they took USDA's recommendations on some products. We helped them with the reentry intervals for table grapes, and we're working with them on oxymil on some. Oops, I went black there on to retain uses for some crops. Extremely incredible. One key one we had recently was working with one product where they had lowered the wind speed on which it could be applied. Well, it's applied on the islands, Hawaii and in Puerto Rico, on pineapples. But if you know how it is when you're in Hawaii, right, Beth? The wind speed can be very variable. It could be above what is allowed on the label. So one of my staff did incredible outreach with folks in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, did some studies, looked through the literature, looked through some of the weather information, and we were able to show EPA why, how it basically would be I'd say a cancellation if they were not being able to have some consideration on how they need to use these products. And we were able to, EPA was able to make accommodation for that. We have a number, I'll say, successes where we've been able to work with EPA to show them how agriculture works and how the science works, and show them how we can help them make better decisions. On the mitigations for a number of things, we've been able to get some of the mitigations adjusted. We've also, where it is needed, we absolutely will agree with them. I did have one grower complain about having to have an enclosed, I don't remember how it goes on, for paraquat, which is extremely dangerous, but used properly, it can be used, and it's needed by certain grower groups. And one grower complained that it had to be a enclosed container. And I said, well, the alternative is cancellation. So it's really best to follow what kind of mitigations they've established, because the alternative could be much worse. So we work with EPA every single day. EPA sends us over lots and lots of questions, and we do outreach. My staff on their own will do outreach to groups. And then we also host a number of grower groups in our office when we used to be in our office, and we still do it online. We'll meet with grower groups to talk about their needs, their concerns, how they do their production. I will say the most intriguing group we met with has been the watercress group. And I would not have realized how they produce that crop. It's really fascinating, and they talked about their needs, their water use, etc. It was amazing. So we're always looking for different grower groups or different where we can identify where certain product or certain crops are grown, so that we can best assist them. The other thing that we do that we support EPA on is so it's another issue, and it involves 4 federal agencies: the Endangered Species Act and the registration of pesticides. So think about it. EPA has in charge of registering pesticides. The services, meaning Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Marine Fisheries Service, known as the services, they're required to do to implement the Endangered Species Act. So it's been determined by a court several years ago that the act of registering a pesticide requires that EPA has to consult with the services. Wow, I got asked one year when a former director of EPA and I were both testifying in front of I believe it was the Senate Ag Committee. I got asked by one of the senators if I thought it was a conflict of 2 acts, and I said it is. EPA is required to protect all critters under FIFRA, and so I personally felt like the ESA was a bit redundant. There are a lot of people that didn't like that. It's just a personal opinion, but I can say, at least from my experience in working on this for several years, I'm not sure what extra protections we're getting that EPA doesn't already implement. So that's just my personal opinion. So there's been a lot of challenges, and you've seen a couple of the biological opinions come out, controversial. I can't say much about that. You just have to read them. But so because of the impacts to crop protection tools, because if EPA, there's no way there's enough workforce to do ESA consultations and pesticide registration. It takes an incredible amount of time. There's not enough people that know the issues or know the science. So it's one of those resource issues, actually. Someone's calculated it's like 200 years to be able to do the workload that EPA has now. Is quite remarkable. So what happens is some of those tools cannot get registered, or companies don't want to move forward with new technologies because they cannot, they have no, what's the word, you guys, was mentioned by this Lauren before me, no certainty of when those crop protection tools could get registered, even if they're biotech. So it's quite a challenge. So in the last Farm Bill, Congress put together a committee, formalizing a committee of EPA, NOAA, or Department of Commerce, Department of Interior, Department of Agriculture, and the Council on Environmental Quality to address the issues that that the agencies have encountered during consultation. So that's moving along. But ESA is something we're dealing with. We meet regularly with EPA and the services every week. I meet with them. But this is a big deal. We've got to get this right, the impacts. And let me just step back why USDA is involved. So in consultation, agriculture we don't do consultation with EPA or the services. We're not even a party to that. However, several years ago, and it was just shortly after I got here, when grower groups started seeing the outcome of some of the consultations, the people who have to implement those are farmers. And I can tell you that a farmer's not going to live with a 1,000-foot buffer or not being able to spray except on these dates, because we know that's not how ag works. We make it very clear that one size does not fit all for agriculture. It's been a challenge. And more important, we will hear often, well, they can use alternatives. Well, alternatives, one insecticide is not necessarily an alternative for another insecticide. We need to be able to look at timing, what the pest is, the life cycle of the pest, when it needs to be applied, et cetera. There's reason why growers use certain pesticides. So we will say it is not a cut and paste exercise. So it's been quite a challenge on this ESA. So we've tried to be helpful in informing how agriculture works. It's a continuing saga. I suspect it will go on, but there is inroads being made at this point, and that's really what best I can say on that. But it is a big issue because it is, for the most part, because agriculture uses the most pesticides, we're the ones that have to implement the mitigations that would be required. And I can tell you right now, they would be unsatisfactory for what we've seen at this point. The other item I just wanted to mention is pollinators. So that's a pretty important issue. I think you all know. Back in the last administration, we were fortunate to get the attention of the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. EPA and USDA went over and briefed them. And again, that administration decided to elevate the issue of pollinators. And to get it to pollinator, to get it elevated, we also had to include the monarch butterfly, which is not a pollinator, according to our entomologists. So it had to do with pollinators and monarchs. So it was a huge effort, number of workshops that we hosted to identify the stressors to pollinators. Then we hosted a number with EPA, a number of other workshops, symposiums on pollinators, put out a huge report. And toward the end of the administration, I will tell you a lot of that work has continued. In the last Farm Bill, there was a whole section on pollinators. And then one of the things that Congress did is they called for a pollinator coordinator at USDA to look at the research that's being done. We want to make sure that we're not doing duplicative research, but doing research that's actually going to contribute to improving pollinator health. So Miss Elizabeth Hill, who used to work on my staff, has taken that position in the Office of the Chief Scientist. And most recently, they held a workshop online, virtual, with the research community for the most part, and stakeholders to discuss where we are and where we need to go, what's going on, and so forth. So that report is currently being carried out. But she has she has a community at USDA that she works with on pollinators, and then she also works very closely with the Environmental Protection Agency to address the pollinator issues. I also want to say that we also work on behalf of APHIS, our Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, to make sure that the work that they do across America, the programs that they implement, those pesticides that they need to contain or try to address the invasives are still available. And we also work with the U.S. Forest Service to do the same thing. So we've got a huge workload. I've got to look at the time. I think I've left time for some questions. But anyway, I'm really glad to be here today. I hope I've answered a lot of questions. I can just assure all of you that USDA and EPA are actively involved. We have a fantastic staff that work very close together. And if we haven't met some of the grower needs, please reach out to us. We're glad to meet with you and discuss how we can assist you. With that, I'm glad to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kanika. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Kanika? I'll start with one. You talked about the level of science that is in EPA's FIFRA program. And as the agriculture community, we believe that and we trust that. But the general public doesn't seem to understand, if maybe that's the right way to put that. Do you have any ideas on how we could better communicate to the general public that our products are safe, our food is safe, maybe no concern is not the right word, but the products are highly scrutinized before they're ever used on crops.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. I have folks on my staff that are do science communication, and we have hosted some workshops at USDA because we kind of feel like we've got to work with our own agencies across USDA to help understand the use of pesticides, et cetera. I completely agree with you, but in this in this day and time, so many people get their news off of social media, and that's it. I don't need to say anything else. We do try to respond on occasion when we read those things. Very careful. I can tell you that have to be super careful when we respond because it's really a lot of whiplash. People can be really awful if they disagree with you. That's all I'll say. And we've taken some of the brunt of that. When EPA puts out something, we will very carefully, or I'll ask the Secretary's office, this is really important for our grower community. We need to support them, and we will do that. You can see the Secretary, Sonny Perdue, has put out statements regarding some of the EPA actions. In the last administration, I'll say Secretary Vilsack was a great supporter of our office. He went to bat for us on a number of issues. So I want to just say that. Having the secretaries really does help, but it's a word of mouth. And I just saw something yesterday that said people really trust farmers. So it's those. So I follow a lot of. I don't know on Twitter or whatever they're called. Some of the folks that do science communications, because there's some terrific ideas. But I try to correct people when I can, not my neighbors, because I don't want my lawn torn up or anything. But we do try to correct things when we can, but we just have to be super careful. But we are working on science communications, and our office hopes to be doing a little more of that very, very soon. We've had great discussions about it, but I agree with you. I would highly suggest to EPA to continue to do those wonderful rollouts like they did with Enlist Duo, to talk about the conservatism in the work that they do that's protective, and go forward from that, because I thought that was fantastic. And they did it in a manner that it wasn't so scientific that people didn't understand it. It was in a way that anybody listening could understand what EPA done and why the decision was correct. So it's all about that you have to know your audience and know how to speak the language.
Great. Thank you. Lauren, I'll kick it over to you to lead the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Cheryl, the point you just made is something that I think our work group was searching for, were some good examples of projects and situations that we've already seen that we could use to kind of guide some recommendations. So thank you for that. And we'll make sure that the notes reflect that and we can kind of dig into the past there. I think our next question here is Don Brown. If you have a
Thank you. I appreciate your report very much. It's quite interesting. I'm from Colorado, and so we live in a world where preemption, of course, under the Department of Agriculture in Colorado, preemption exists as a statewide entity, and now they're just talking about taking that away statewide. But Joe Negus's bill and Udall's bill, will you guys will you be allowed to have input? Will you take a stance on the preemption component and the idea that each little entity could decide how they want to be treated?
Well, that's tough. So what happens is Office of Congressional Relations at USDA, when they get sent a copy of that, they will reach out to us and we will weigh in on it. Sometimes it's just looking at the language and making edits to it. Sometimes it's just opining what we think about that, or what the implications are of it, or the more important, how it will impact American agriculture. We'll write that up and send that over. And what has generally happened in the past is that letter will go from the secretary or the deputy secretary to OMB, whether we support it or not. And so that's how we get to weigh in on that. We have to be very careful on any kind of language or what the states are doing. I will say, we don't, my office generally does not weigh in on what states particularly do, but I will tell you that for the first time ever, our office last week, I signed a letter on the EP. So the state of California is, they're having discussions about the use of neonicotinoids. Right. And some of what they proposed would be very detrimental to agriculture. And so we sent them, which we think would be very helpful, comments regarding the use of neonics, why we use them, et cetera. It's not policy, or it's not anything like that. It's just the facts about how growers use neonics and why they're needed. So that's the first time ever that since I've been here that we weighed in on something that the state would do is proposing, but it was technical or scientific in nature.
Well, I see this as being the tip of the iceberg nationally, and was wondering what your position and where we're headed with that. I think it'll have a profound effect on our farmers here, whereby companies' reluctance to register products and those sort of things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Appreciate your report today. It was excellent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, John. I think Sharon is the next with her hand up virtually.
Whoops, just in time to get a phone call. Sorry about that. I don't have so much as a question as just a couple of comments. I appreciate the presentation, really great information. I would echo what Tom said about the safety issues and making sure that that is as well known in the public as it is in the farm world, the ag world. And, we don't ever want to spray more or purchase more product than we have to, and certainly concerned. We live and work in the middle of our farms, and certainly concerned about our own families as well as the friends and neighbors around us. So I would just echo Tom's comments on that. I was really pleased to hear you say too that it's always in the forefront of your thoughts that one size does not fit all. Mm-hmm. We're a big country. We're a very diverse country. And I think it's really important to consider regions, even regions within states makes a big difference. Yeah. And so I appreciated your comment and your acknowledgement of that. So thank you. I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other hands up or questions?
Lauren, I would follow up with another question if no one else has one right now. Just kind of along the lines of the question Don Brown asked, what do you see what are other barriers that you see to more products, technologies coming to market?
Right now, I just got to be really frank. It's being able to get the ESA component finished or figured out. There's not enough staff. There's not enough resources to meet the demand. So you'll see, and they may talk about it after me, EPA is putting out interim decisions. And they're interim, they've got everything else completed with the exception, for the most part, of the Endangered Species Act consultations, which sometimes take years. And then what happens is they go to court, and then it starts over again. And that's actually what seems to be happening over the last many, many years. And then there's another endocrine disruptors. It's also a component. EPA, I think, can address that very well. But ESA is the thing that will be the biggest roadblock because of the uncertainty. I mean, a company can spend millions and millions of dollars and take oodles of years to bring a product to market or to bring it to EPA. But there's no certainty when they can get that consultation completed. And then when EPA does move forward, finding in some parts or like on some chemicals that they registered, they look where they can find no effect. And so they've been able to register it for use in certain parts of the country because they got that no effect for the Endangered Species Act. That's the biggest challenge. It really is. And we really hate to see tools not come to our growers because some of them are really cool and they can be really helpful. And but having that roadblock there could be real problematic.
And I don't want to take up too much time, but do you see anything happening either through Congress or Department of Interior to change that?
So I'll say at Interior, the Secretary Bernhardt over there, he knows ESA very well. He was actually very engaged. He actually did a whole day meeting with us one day. He said he was coming to our meeting. I will tell you that got folks pretty excited. He wasn't the secretary at that time. He's the deputy. But he knows ESA. He totally gets it. We've had a pretty good relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, there's just challenges in philosophy with some agencies, but Fish and Wildlife has been terrific to work with this year or over the last few years. And they're doing some really creative things, working very closely with EPA. Some of the challenges have been about data. And so we've been working very closely with them on that. So, yeah, Interior has been a good agency to work with.
Good questions, Chairman. Thank you. Gary, I think you're next with your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Cheryl, I get quite concerned when I see on the label that certain nozzles are required to apply a product. All these newer sprayers all have controllers in them, but at least like the option of using nozzles that I have more experience with. Controller, when you slow down with the sprayer, it drops the pressure. A lot of times you can apply products in a higher wind and not have any drift. So just keep that in mind, if you would, please, going forward.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I will say that having to do with nozzles and a number, I say quite a few of our comments that we've submitted to EPA, for which on many they've adopted, we've addressed the different nozzles rather than specifying which nozzle we're looking at a certain outcome. And that's what I believe is how we've addressed that. But thank you for that. I'm sure my staff are listening and have heard what you just said.
And one last comment, I'm very glad you're on our side.
Oh, sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'm sure you hear that quite a bit, Cheryl.
Pardon? What was
I'm
that?
sure you hear that quite a bit.
Yes, and let me just say, and I was thinking of this earlier. My father taught me that it's not about the money that you earn or the number of people that you supervise or anything. It's about if you have the most important thing is satisfaction in your job. And I feel like with what we do in our staff, we work on behalf of agriculture. We have great satisfaction that we're helping all of you. And I leave my little computer and go into the next room every day knowing that we've done the very best that we can. We're all so committed. I would not have anybody on my staff that wasn't committed to working for ag. We all love to eat, and I think that might be part of our drive.
I'm sorry, Gary, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Did you have another comment?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. I believe we have a question from Jimmy.
Yes, Cheryl, your enthusiasm is contagious. So I am glad that you're on our side. Can you talk to us a little bit how your agency and the EPA bring science to the courtroom? How does that work? I mean, we've had some court cases, and I'm not talking about anyone specifically, but how do you interface with the courts whenever you're asked to bring that testimony? Do you do it together? Is it separate? Does the court decide? Can you just kind of explain to me how that mechanism works?
Yeah. So what'll happen often is there's been three instances over the last couple of years where we've supported EPA in court. We've written a declaration, and it's three different. I won't say what the suits were, but pretty important for all of us. So we've been asked either by EPA staff, or Department of Justice if we would support this. So what we've done is looked at what the folks that have sued EPA have alleged, or they want to have certain products canceled or a suite of products canceled. And so what we've done is we've looked at what the proposal was. I will tell you on one of them were just remarkable. It was 5 pesticides. One of them is not even used for agriculture. And yet they talked about it, how it was detrimental to the species and this and that and drift and all that. It's not even used in agriculture. So when we pointed out how silly that was, it was for carpets or something. But we will wait. We'll look at those products. We'll look at what the true alternatives are. We'll look at what the implications are of this, if the court were to get rid of all of these or vacate the registrations of these products. We've talked about, and I'll use this in another document I'm getting ready to put together on about it not being cut and paste, that you just don't take this product for this product. That doesn't work. I was in a meeting once where the Deputy Secretary of EPA asked a person, do they have alternatives? And that person said yes. And we were sitting there going, no, it's not. We weren't allowed to talk. But it's not a cut and paste exercise. So we'll very gently describe that because it's for the court. You've got to write it so they understand it. And we'll defend it different ways. Some of it is truly scientific, very technical, but we point out how it's used. The economics, we've gone into deep detail about the economics, what happens to all kinds of things on MRLs for trade, for folks to be able to just switch out. I mean, how we do planning. So you purchase your seed and some of your product in advance. If this goes away, you've got all this waiting and you've already paid your money for this and that. So we look at all different aspects of agriculture and the economics associated with that. And we present that in a filing, and it goes over to EPA. Their attorneys and DOJ will come back and forth and ask us questions, do edits, and then it's final. On another, worked directly with DOJ and did briefings with them as they were preparing to go to court. He'd ask us questions, and we would respond, no, don't say that. That's not absolutely correct. Here's how we would phrase it. So it was that kind of, it depends on who we're working with and what they're doing and what court they're going before.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think we're almost ready for our next set of speakers, but Jeff Gore, I believe you had your hand up right in time. So if you don't mind making it quick, this might be our last one.
Well, if we don't have time, we don't have to do it right now.
No pressure, but I feel like go ahead. We want to make sure you get your question in.
Okay, Cheryl, and this hopefully this will be quick. You talked a lot about USDA's position or responsibilities with registration, but a lot of pesticides right now are going through re-registration processes. Is USDA's role pretty similar with re-registration as it is initial registration?
Oh, yeah. Initial registration, actually, we don't have a lot of input because that's really between EPA and the registrant when it's a new product. We'll weigh in about why we think it's important to add another tool to the toolbox. But we definitely, that's what we do all the time is registration review. So we're in the second round, I believe, second 15 years. So yes, we're very, very, very involved. That's what I have the staff for. We write comments. I mean, right now, I can bet you I might have something waiting for me to read, sign, and submit to EPA. We do that. That's one of our core responsibilities.
All right. Cheryl, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You have brought a wealth of information. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. I'm sure the pesticide work group will have more questions for you into the future. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time today. Next on our program, we've got a panel, Ed Messina and Michael Goodis are going to present. Ed is currently the acting director of EPA's Office of Pesticide Programs and previously served as the deputy office director for programs. Prior to that, Ed was the director of EPA's Monitoring, Assistance, and Media Programs Division within the Office of Compliance, in charge of EPA's inspection policies. The acting associate director of EPA's Enforcement Division, where he helped manage complex air litigation, and a branch chief for both the air and waste enforcement programs. Ed started his legal career in Chicago, where he litigated and negotiated as an associate regional counsel for EPA Region 5. Michael Goodis is the acting deputy director for programs of the Office of Pesticide Programs at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. OPP regulates the manufacture and use of all pesticides, including conventional, antimicrobial, and biopesticides in the U.S., and establishes maximum levels for pesticide residues in food to safeguard the nation's food supplies. Mr. Goodis has over 23 years of experience in collaborating with federal and state agencies, industry and environmental groups, and other stakeholders in pesticide registration and risk management decisions, making to ensure pesticide products meet required U.S. safety standards. So, gentlemen, thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us. Really appreciate it and looking forward to your questions. We've got a full agenda today to hopefully educate you on the process that OPP engages in. I'm bummed that I'm following Dr. Konekis. If I had some say, maybe I would have reordered that to manage your expectations, because she is such a great person and a wealth of information. So with that, do you need me to share my screen? I know we sent our slides over, or do you, and I'm happy to do that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Unless, okay, Rebecca, let me share my screen. And let me know if you're seeing it. And
it's there.
We see it.
And as soon as that button moves away, I will slideshow from the beginning. All right, and let me minimize. All right, do I need to minimize the video piece, or you can see? You're good now? Okay, great. All right, so we're going to talk about Office of Pesticide Programs, the structure, sort of how we do the work we're doing. I'm going to talk about the legislation that influences how we do our work. We're going to talk about the pesticide registration and registration review process. My deputy, Mike Goodis, is going to go into a deeper dive on that for you. The risk assessments, how public involvement occurs within EPA, and then our collaboration with domestic, international partners and stakeholders. And then I know folks were interested in a deeper dive on some of the topics, including Endangered Species Act, PIPs, I think were of interest, NAMs, our new approach methods for animal testing. And so we'll take a deeper dive at the end of the overview into specific areas, and then also entertain any questions you might have. So within the universe of what OPP regulates, generally there are 18 major producers of pesticide formulations, 100 other producers, and 2,300 formulators, about 20,000 distributors. Our regulations on the label apply to the 2.2 million farms that are out there, the users of these products, important products for growers. One of the messages from EPA is, we understand and we do farm tours a lot. We haven't done them during the pandemic, but we really try to understand the pressures that farmers are under to make sure that you have a multiple access to multiple tools to address those pest pressures. And we also want to make sure that while they're being used, they are safe for human health and the environment. And I'm going to show you some of the science, and Mike's going to talk about how we sort of get there and balance those interests. Residential uses, so any time you're using a residential product on your garden. Also, any disinfectants you're using when you're picking up a can of Lysol spray and it says that it's effective against SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes the current COVID-19 pandemic. How do we know that it's effective? What testing do we do? And our shop has been 24/7 approving products for the current pandemic. It's a big part of what we've been doing this year. And if you're interested in further information on that, our website talks about our response. And we also have our List N website, which lists the products that we've tested and have determined are effective against SARS-CoV-2 using the data that's submitted. And then we have about 1,200 active ingredients, 16,000 pesticide products. Along with those products are tolerances that we set on food. I'm going to talk about why we do that and the statute that involves that. And we process greater than 10,000 transactions a year within OPP. And that's anything from a label amendment to a new use to a new active ingredient. And we receive and evaluate scientific information for greater than 2,000 pesticide applications per year. So the data packages and the science that we undertake is quite enormous for an annual effort that we undertake. And then also, as Dr. Kanikas mentioned, and as you guys are familiar with, we have our new registrations, and we really prioritize as part of our portfolio approving new active ingredients, because we want to make sure that if there are new and novel technologies out there, we want to get those to market as quickly as possible. So that is one of our main priorities. And then our re-registration review of the existing chemicals, updating the science to understand whether they are in need of additional review for human health, safety, and the environment. So within EPA, we're one of the largest programs within headquarters. We have 7 divisions that have about 600 employees. The staff are primarily in Washington, D.C., but some are in the D.C. area, which is Arlington, Virginia. But we have regional offices as well in Region 1 through 10, which is Boston to San Francisco to Dallas. So we have some folks that are stationed around the country. So when you think about the government worker within the U.S. government, I have a different view from the government worker than some. The folks that I work with are some of the smartest people I've ever met. They have PhDs in toxicology and chemistry and biology and weed science work, entomologists, the folks that enjoy working with the bugs and really providing insight. So that's my view of the government worker. I'm just proud to be part of the organization and I'm in awe with the experts that we have that are world-renowned experts. So other countries come to us and ask us how we do our science reviews. And that's a testament to the career people that we have within the organization. This is our structure. So we have Office of Pesticide Programs, Acting Office Director, myself, and then Mike Goodis, the Deputy Director for Programs. On the right side is the Health Effects Division, the Environmental Fate and Effects Division, and the Biological and Economics Analysis Division. So when you think about how we process either a registration or registration review, there are many scientists within each of these divisions that are looking at the human health impact. They're looking at the environmental fate of the chemical, drinking water, ESA. They're looking at the economic benefit. So we get to balance the risk and benefit under the FIFRA statute to say, you know, there could be a risk here. And we could identify risk, but you know what? There are no alternatives to this product to address severe pest pressures. So in some instances, the benefit can outweigh the risks. And even though there are risks there, we will enlist appropriate mitigation and have that product available. That's different from some of the European standards, which are precautionary principle only. And if they identify any hazard, it's a hazard-based system, then that product will need to be removed. Whereas in the US, under FIFRA, we have a risk-based statute. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences when we deal with food and how that burden shifts. We have our endocrine disruptor program, screening program within Office of Pesticide Programs. Antimicrobials division, that's the disinfectants on the left. The biopesticides, which are the biological pesticides. Registration division handles the conventional new registrations. And then our pesticide reevaluation division handles our re-registrations. And so you can see all these divisions on the left are really interacting with the divisions on the right as the science package makes its way through the organization. So these are generally our responsibilities: protecting human health and the environment, ensuring that pesticide residues on food and feed are safe, ensuring that pesticide users have information, example, clear labels for enforceability, ensuring decisions reflect the best science, and looking at evolving science. And so some areas that we're focused on making sure we have a handle on include endangered species, pollinators, endocrine disruption, human studies, how do we address and accept human studies, and then any new science and challenging policy issues. We have science advisory panels that we can go to. We have in-house peer review that we conduct, that everyone looks at each other's works and takes it to a particular HAZPOC committee, which deals with the hazards. So you, as an individual scientist with an OPP, you're going to have to present your work to a committee of peers, or if it's a really challenging science question, you're going to have to submit it to our science advisory panel. And then certainly meeting market needs, ensuring that industry has timely decisions for their products, knowing that it takes a long time to develop a product. And by the time we receive it, it's sort of at the end of that long process, and where $50 to $100 million worth of investment could have been applied to that product. So making sure we are as timely as we can be in our review so that product can come to market quickly for the farmers and consumers to have multiple tools. And then meeting our statutory and mandated milestones. So these are the statutes that govern our work. So we are the executive branch of the government. We are implementing what the legislative branch has asked us to do. And there are certain standards that we're trying to meet. And these are some of the main statutes. So everyone's familiar with FIFRA, which deals with the registration and licensing. There's FFDCA, which establishes tolerances and maximum residue levels for residues in food. We have the Food Quality Protection Act, which amended FFDCA, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then we have our Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, which are the fees that registrations get paid by registrants to make sure that hold us to schedules. So there's a fee that's paid, there's a schedule that comes with it for a new active ingredient. It's 18 months to 2 years, and we've got to meet those deadlines, and we're focused on meeting those deadlines, and that's a statutory deadline. And then Endangered Species Act. we're going to take a deeper dive later on Endangered Species Act, but really, as Dr. Koneckas mentioned, it's one of the interesting intersections between FIFRA, which is a statute that's designed to allow products that kill things into the environment. We register the CIDES, the CIDES, right? So we are allowing, through permit and licensing, the ability for somebody to kill something. The ESA part of that is, how are you going to ensure that an endangered species will not be killed as a result of this approval? And the action of the agency is that approval of that label. So we're sort of in the position, this is why it's a tough science question, of proving a negative, that it won't kill something when we know that it does, and showing that a single molecule or a single plant that's endangered is not going to be impacted when we approve the uses for a wide area across the entire country. And so you'll see some of the label mitigation that occurs to protect against Endangered Species Act, and to do that balance that the legislature has asked us to do, which is to approve pesticides but make sure that endangered species are not harmed. And that's a pretty tricky science issue to work through, but we've had some movement this past year. So FIFRA governs the licensing, sale, and distribution of pesticides, making sure that labels are safe and proper when used in accordance in a label. The standard that we're trying to achieve, that all of the science is measured against, is showing that it will not cause an unreasonable risk to humans or the environment, considering the economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits of the pesticides. So you can see that unreasonable risk. There is an acceptance that there could be some risk, because obviously the AIs, the active ingredients, are designed to mitigate and kill things. So there's going to be a risk, but the standard is will not cause an unreasonable risk to humans or the environment. And then we get to consider the economic, social, and environmental cost benefits of the pesticide. And when you look at the recent dicamba decision, and it was interesting, I caught the tail end about spray rigs and the different droplets. When we have data that can demonstrate that the hooded sprayers, for example, in dicamba, we were able to say, you know what, that's a new technology, and so the buffer doesn't need to be quite as big if we didn't have that technology. We need data to demonstrate that, and that was also an Endangered Species Act aspect, where because of the hooded sprayers, we had some data that said, you know what, it's going to drift less, we need less buffers. That's how we're an example of how we're using data. And the court in that decision, in the dicamba decision, also asked us to look at the societal costs, because as we know, dicamba presented an interesting use case where it wasn't just sort of growers and the NGOs that sometimes oppose these. There were growers within growers who were, depending on the type of crop that you grew, we needed to balance that. And the court said, you know what, you didn't do a great job, EPA, of examining the impact on society as a result of the drift that was occurring between the farmers that were experiencing the drift and being drifted upon, and the farmers who really needed this product to address significant weed pressure, including lots of the weeds that sort of grow in the mare's tail, and issues with breakthrough of the other chemicals and other products. So that was an example of where you can see the statutory language coming up through our decisions. And this new decision, in fact, analyzes that, and we feel like it's supportable now, given the direction we got from the Ninth Circuit. So the risk-benefit standard considers human and ecological risks and non-dietary, and we can ask for additional mitigation and additional data. So FFDCA, this is where we set our tolerances, and it's now a different standard. So it's a reasonable, we have to prove that there's no reasonable certainty of harm or a reasonable certainty of no harm, right? So we've got to show that. So if we're lacking data, or we get a petition that says, you know what, we have new information that says there's potential harm from this tolerance, level or from this new product, we have to examine that. And so you'll see a number of petitions under FFDCA where we need to, through science, show, and we have to demonstrate now that there's a reasonable certainty of no harm. And then the Food Quality Protection Act, which amended both FIFRA and the FFDCA, created this risk-based standard of reasonable certainty of no harm. And it also created stricter standards for tolerance setting, including for protected populations for children. So when you hear about EPA's 10X factor, this is where this comes from. So we need to apply a 10X FQPA safety factor to determine and make sure that the residues are protective. If we have more refined data, that we can really know what the endpoints are, we know what the hazards are, we can remove the 10X factor, and maybe it becomes a 1X factor or a 3X factor or something in between. But that's where we're asking the registrants for additional data to demonstrate what the standard should be for reasonable certainty of no harm, including protections for children and sensitive populations, and what that risk and why we can support lowering that 10X safety factor. And so FIFRA and FFDCA, before we can register a pesticide under FIFRA, we first have to either say that no tolerance is needed or establish a tolerance. So sometimes when you get a new active ingredient, a lot of what goes into that is determining whether the endpoints and the hazards require us to set a tolerance, or what happens sometimes in the biological areas. This is a chemical that's widely ingested around the world. At any level, it's safe, and we have studies to back that up. That's where we will have a tolerance exempt pesticide, and those tend to be the BPD products, the biologicals. And then FDA will enforce the tolerances. And there's some confusion around the tolerances, and people say, well, look, is the tolerance a safety measure? It is, but it's more established to take into account the highest application rate and the residues that are found at the farm gate as they're leaving. So and also what that means is it's almost an enforcement type of mechanism. It's not necessarily a safety mechanism, although our analysis on the front end will ensure safety, because what that tolerance is, it's the highest level that we expect to see at the farm gate, where what that's going to tell you is something went wrong. Someone applied way too much pesticide to this product for it to trigger a tolerance. So if you're triggering a tolerance level, something has gone wrong and the residues are way too high. And so one of the primary functions for tolerance is actually the enforcement tool to ensure the compliance with registered labels. Because if we set that too low, and we would be getting maybe more hits, and there would be lots of adulterated food, which we don't want. But those tolerances are set at a level that is the highest rate at the farm gate, and we know that people are exposed to much less after they wash it and after it travels. So we use the numbers, and we use USDA's numbers, and each year where we get information on what are the actual residues that are found on food, which are generally well below tolerances, and we take the residues that are used on food to talk about how much is left in what's called the risk cup for food tolerances. And then we've got our Pesticide Registration Improvement Act. This is where we receive fees, and we are put on schedules to both determine how long it's going to take to do a label amendment, to do a new active ingredient, to do a new use. And so we receive funding through this license-based approach. And then, of course, we have Endangered Species Act, which we have a deeper dive on later on after Mike talks, to say, what have we been doing in this space? But the standard here is making sure that actions, and so the actions for us are the authorization of the sale and distribution of a pesticide, the actions that we authorize, making sure they will not result in jeopardy or adversely modify designated critical habitat for species listed as endangered or threatened by Fish and Wildlife Service or National Marine Fisheries Service. And this is under 7A2 of the statute. And there's a lot of science that goes into demonstrating that our actions are not jeopardizing species. And that's easier to do for like building a dam or a road. It's much harder to do for a chemical that is going to be widely used across the United States. And so we have methodologies that we have put into place to examine this. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to my deputy, Mike Goodis, who's going to give you a deeper dive. He was the head of the registration division for many years on the specifics for the different types of registrations and how we go about doing those review. And then I'll come back and wrap it up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ed. It's a pleasure to be here also with you all. And thank you for inviting us. So, Ed, I'll leave it to you to change the slides, but I'll start with this one. So, again, there are two main regulatory engines within Office of Pesticide Programs: pesticide registration and registration reviews. So I'll start with pesticide registrations. And again, these can be a variety of actions. They can be anything from a new active ingredient, a whole new mode of action, to adding new use to a pesticide label, to making other amendments to pesticide labels. So those are generally, a fifth, what we refer to as a fifth Section 3 registration action. Emergency exemptions are another authority under statute, Section 18s, for states to request registration for a unregistered product in their state for an emergency situation. There are certain criteria that need to be met, and those are time-limited registrations, and again, under emergency conditions generally. Section 24C is another provision. This allows for states to, it's basically a state registration to, thank you, go back, a new registration for a new use for a special local need just for that location and again, within the state. That's not a time-limited registration, but we do evaluate those as well. And then experimental use permits, registrants, if they're looking for a new product and they need to experiment, try the products in the field, they petition for an experimental use permit. So there are all kinds of regulatory actions that take place. As Ed pointed out, we process thousands of actions in a year, and all under those provisions. In addition to that, as Ed was talking about, we also establish pesticide tolerances or maximum residue levels in our own food. So, next slide, please. So, as Ed mentioned, under the PREA statute, a registrant would submit an application to the agency. Depending on the application, there's, again, a timeline associated with it and also requirements for additional data. And, some, as I indicated, a new active ingredient, a new conventional active ingredient, generally is about a 2-year timeline for that. And some are much shorter. So depending on what we receive and the information, there's an ongoing process for evaluating all kinds of applications that come to the agency. Many of those applications require data, which we assess, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But we spend a lot of time, and again, on new active ingredients. As Ed mentioned, those are a high priority for the program. We view that as very critical for agriculture and public health and in other areas as well. So we try our best to try to meet those timelines and to make sure that the information that's submitted to us is supportive for that decision. And I think, sometimes there are issues we need to work out and take a little bit of time, but I think we're very successful in getting new products on the market. I mean, for conventional pesticides, we average about anywhere from 5 to 7 new active ingredients a year, 10 or so per year for biopesticides, and ever so often for a new antimicrobial pesticide. But, I think, and again, I think we recognize the value of having these new products on the market because they generally are more targeted, generally a lower risk compound, and we think those are better products to have on the market. So, next slide, please. So for both registration, and I'll be talking about for registration review, again, depending on how the pesticide is used, could require any variety of data, product chemistry data, the product performance of the data, which we require generally for public health claims, determination of hazards, so toxicity data. So these are usually laboratory animal studies evaluating the toxicity in all kinds of different exposure scenarios. Both for evaluating the potential toxicity to exposure to humans and also to wildlife as well. Residue chemistry, obviously if a product's being applied to an agricultural crop, want to make sure that the level of residues that are in that crop at the time of harvest at an acceptable level. That's how we evaluate the safety of these chemicals and how that residue may degrade over time and be available down the chain. Occupational exposure. So individuals that apply pesticides, what kind of exposure are they receiving, both dermal and inhalation exposures, and also people in and around the homes, products that are applied in the yard or inside the home, what kind of exposures are people likely to receive. Environmental fate data evaluates basically how the chemical performs in the environment. Is it something that binds closely to the soil, or is it a soluble product and may be easily transported to water bodies during a rain event? Does it degrade in the environment? Does it degrade? What kind of degradants? Are the degradants more toxic than the parent compound? Sometimes that happens. So there are all kinds of different scenarios we have to consider when we're evaluating these chemicals. And again, the potential also for non-target organisms, as I mentioned before, various wildlife and so on. So as part of the registration, again, a registrant would submit an application along with a PREA fee for whatever action, whatever change to the label for their registration. Again, the data is submitted, we review the data, and then, and these data are developed by the applicant, right? So these data are industry-generated data. We do a complete and thorough review of that data. We have all the raw data associated with that. So we do a primary review, a secondary review. Much of that information is then brought to internal committees within EPA so that there's, again, other input from other experts to make sure that nothing is overlooked. And that information is then used to generate risk information used in risk assessments. Based on those risk assessments, then, and I'll talk a little bit more later about our risk management decision, but then, we could, all the changes could be made to how the pesticide was intended to be used to make sure that it's both protected for human exposure and potential ecological exposure as well. Again, I'll get into a little bit more later, but, changing the use patterns in a way, or personal protective equipment for workers, buffer zones and reentry intervals and so on. I mean, are various mitigation measures that can be employed to make sure that chemicals that are on market are safe. So next slide. So this is just a flow chart, if you will, of various steps that we use, mainly for our new active ingredients and higher, or for products that are for the first time to be used in for outdoor uses or residential exposures. We don't do this for every single registration action because it just wouldn't be feasible to do that. But we do offer a public comment opportunities for new registration. It's actually not required by statute or regulation. It's a policy that EPA has employed now for a number of years to provide transparency and make sure there's opportunities for our input for us to better understand how these chemicals are to be used. So when an application comes in, if issue a notice of receipt of the application and what its intended use and so on, provide a comment period then. Again, we'll go through and review the data when we eventually get to a point where we're making a proposed decision for a new active ingredient, for example. We'll issue that document for a public comment period also to make sure that, we didn't overlook anything. And if there's some input that we didn't fully consider, here's an opportunity to get some feedback for us. And then we'll issue a final decision for those registration actions. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, the second main regulatory engine within the Office of Pesticide Program is registration review. So, I think many of you are probably familiar. Registration review is basically looking at currently existing registrations on an ongoing 15-year cycle. And the idea there is that, what we knew 15 years ago could be very different than what we know now. New information could come to light that can change our understanding of the safety and use of that chemical. Science is always advancing. Science methodologies are always advancing and changing. And how we consider certain data may change over time. Just as I mentioned before, new information could alter our understanding that was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so it's, I think we all think it's prudent to have a periodic check in and make sure that these chemicals, these pesticides are still safe the way they're proposed and the instructions on the label. And if not, if there are changes to be made, that there's a process to do that. So for registration review, as Ed mentioned before, there are about 1,100 pesticide active ingredients. Those are actually lumped into what we call cases. And there are 726 cases when the first round of registration review started in 2007. And a case is basically active ingredients. A case can include more than one active ingredient that are of a similar nature that can rely on the same set of data. So, there are some compounds that are closely related. So that's how we consolidate those into cases. So the first round of registration review is to be completed October 1st of 2022. And we're getting there. I started actually in my career in a reevaluation program and it was part of the beginning of the registration review. And I can't believe it's almost 15 years. It flies by. But anyway, we go through a whole process of and I'll get into it here in the next slide, of evaluating the chemical and making sure that, again, that those chemicals are still safe. Next slide, please. So similar to before, it's a little more involved here in the registration review process. This is actually stipulated in our regulations of our public comment process. And so when we initiate registration review for a pesticide, we refer to as opening a docket. And we issue a preliminary work plan showing here's what we understand of the state of the science for the chemical now. Here's where we think we need some additional data. And here's the timeline for completing this registration review case. That's an opportunity for public comment. Based on the information we receive, then we'll finalize that work plan. Usually a case will require additional data. And so in those situations, we'll issue a data call in to the registrants and we receive additional data. Sometimes that's a 2-year timeframe alone. And then reviewing that data and completing a risk assessment is roughly about an additional 1.5 years. So, you're approaching almost 4 years of timeline before we get to completing a draft risk assessment, which we issue for public comment. And again, based on the information we receive, we may change how we conduct that risk assessment. We'll use that information for a proposed regulatory decision or proposed interim decision, which we will release for public comment as well. And then based on that information, we will either make some changes or perhaps not. Sometimes, we don't receive very many comments. And then we'll finalize our decision at that point. That'll conclude a case. Roughly, for a full timeline that involves the requirement of data and review of data, that's almost a 6-year timeline from start to finish for a registration review case. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of where we are right now in the registration review for the first round of registration review. You'll see that we completed most of the, actually going back, we completed most of the draft risk assessments, and we have about 24% of our proposed decisions remaining to be completed and about 34% of our final or interim decisions within the next 2 years, remember, of October 22. So those are very challenging deadlines for us, and we're trying our best to meet them. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. So enforcement, I think many times you hear us say, the label is the law, and we really rely on that. It is a violation of federal law to use the pesticide not in accordance with a federal label. And, those are enforcement actions that, again, we established the safety of the chemical and the use of the chemical through the label. The enforcement of those, of the application based on those labels are left to the states. Those are primary enforcers. So as you can imagine, there's plenty of interaction that we have with states on various enforcement actions throughout the course of the year. A big part, as Ed was describing, and a big part of enforcement as well is, again, the establishment of tolerances, an acceptable level of residues. And again, that is all based on the residue data and the environmental fate data and all the information we receive in evaluating the chemical. And we make a determination of what's a safe level, what's the appropriate level of residues based on the use of that chemical for how it's intended to be used. Provided we say that it's a safe chemical for the proposed use, we establish that residue level. And again, that's more for an enforcement tool than anything else. We work very closely with FDA and USDA as well as far as the enforcement. FDA looks at all the domestic food and imported food, and USDA looks at the meat and milk products. So getting to all that, and again, we have to go through a risk assessment process. And so there are two main components there: is a human health risk assessment and environmental fate and effects risk assessment. As Ed described, we have two main divisions within the Office of Pesticides that work on these actions, both for registration and registration review actions. They're the scientists. Again, they're the toxicologists and the chemists and the biologists and the entomologists and so on, all the PhDs, and they do amazing work. They review all that data. They do primary, secondary reviews, committee reviews. They write up reviews of all the data and then use that information for developing the risk assessments that identify where there are potential risks of concern based on standard practices and our standard methodology, scientific methodologies rather, in how we evaluate both human health and environmental risks. And then they develop a risk assessment. And again, there's a very complex process. There's information that comes out on the risk assessment that shows where there are potential exceedances of our level of concern or whether it may be below our level of concern. What I like to say is, again, there's a risk assessment that we received, and then there's also risk characterization. And I'll describe that in a second. But a simple way for me to think about it is that risk assessment will give you a number. You'll see our information, our risk assessments that are available. You'll see all kinds of numbers, and that's great. That number tells us, again, whether we're exceeding a level of concern or not. The risk characterization, I think, is equally as important. And the risk characterization basically tells you what that number means, right? And so there's always uncertainty, some level of uncertainty in any risk assessment that we do. There's from the toxicology studies and how they're evaluated, and the likely effects, the potential effects based on those studies can deter, provides some uncertainty in the data that's been submitted to us. We're always challenged in evaluating and addressing those uncertainties, and sometimes adding additional safety factors to compensate for some of those uncertainties. Those are great conversations that we have, and it's important information to also share to the public and everyone, so that those are opportunities also to help refine the risk assessment also. And refining the risk assessment makes it more representative for how that chemical is performed and how it's what kind of effects we may see. And so again, risk assessment gives you a number, risk characterization basically tells you what that number means. Next slide. As Ed pointed out, our economic and analysis division provides information as part of this regulatory process on the benefits and the alternatives and impacts with that action. So in those assessments, we look at not just, what are the cost differences from the chemical, although that is included, but what I look for as a risk manager is like, what is this chemical providing that others are not, right? What are the impacts if this chemical is no longer available? Not that we're looking to cancel chemicals, but if some changes are made that makes it less desirable for a grower to use, for example, what are the potential impacts, and are there alternatives available? And are those alternatives better? Do they have to use more frequently than the current use of the chemical? And I mean, there are all kinds of different scenarios that we look for, and the information that we receive. And this is critical. This is critical information for risk management decision, which I'll get into in a second also. It's not just the risk assessment, but it's also the benefits and what impacts are out there. All that feeds together into a risk management decision. So the regulatory decisions submitted for registration and registration review is where that information comes together and making a regulatory decision on whether or not the pesticide, that particular product can be registered, and whether or not additional restrictive measures need to be added, or perhaps reduced in some cases as well too. Risk management, it's not, there's a lot of judgment that goes into these, and no two cases are the same. That in one hand, that makes the job very interesting and exciting. On the other hand, it makes it a really difficult job sometimes because no two are alike. But we also, there's a lot of, again, we're having to weigh a lot of information. It gets into the characterization also, the information that we had. Again, some information that's, when I say characterization, is very strong, very accurate. Some is less so. And so we have to take those considerations in our decision. Next slide. So this is kind of sums it all up in a way. We're making a regulatory decision, and you'll see some of the main components. We talked about the legal standards, as Ed was talking about earlier. Risk characterization, risk assessment, and risk characterization. Risk management tools are the mitigation I was talking about earlier. Maybe we reduce the application rate or the frequency of application or the time interval from the application. Maybe it requires for occupational workers additional PPE or engineering controls or so on, or buffer zones or whatever. The benefits and impacts analysis, right? That's another piece. And then the public input. That's critical for us as well, making sure that we're not overlooking anything. We piece all that information together, and again, with those standards, some we are limited to a risk-only standard, right? So for tolerances and dietary exposure and generally residential exposure, it's a risk-only analysis. In other areas, ecological and mostly for occupational, it's a risk-benefit determination. So all these pieces sort of fit together for a regulatory decision. I kind of use like a football analogy. It's that when we're making these decisions, and I can't say that we're always perfect at doing this, but if we're having to make a change to a chemical, if we feel that the risks are so high that some protective measures need to be added, I want to make sure that we're not inadvertently creating a larger risk issue as a result of that decision, right? If we're restricting a chemical so much that a grower, for example, needs to use other chemicals to compensate for the lack of the use of that chemical, is that better or worse? And if it's worse, then I don't think we're really meeting our mission of reducing risk from the use of pesticides. That's a difficult thing to kind of anticipate, how a chemical or how users are going to respond to a regulatory action like that. But that is something we try our best to do. Like I said, it's not a science. That's where public information, public input is really helpful for us to better understand that. I kind of use it as like as long as we're moving the ball down the field in the right direction towards a goal, then I think we're meeting our mission. It may only be a yard or two, or it could be a first down, but as long as we're moving in that right direction. Now, having said that, being in Washington, D.C., and I know our professional football team, we're used to losing yards on every Sunday. I just want to assure you that even though we're used to that, we don't employ that with our regulatory decisions. So we try to move down the field in a positive direction. So public involvement, we interact with a wide variety of organizations out there in all kinds of different levels. Some of our more prominent ones, again, I think Ed has mentioned, there's a FIFRA scientific advisory panel. This is an expert panel that we pull in for where we have really complex science issues and we need external peer review input on helping us navigate through those issues. And we have several of those a year. There's a pesticide program dialogue committee, which is a diverse group of stakeholders from not just industry, but academia and environmental groups and other government organizations and so on that help us work through some issues as well. Input from pesticide industry. We also interact regularly with environmental organizations, other government organizations. I'll talk a little bit more about international organizations as well. That's critical for us also. But we're regularly involved with outside input and seek their input as well for working through many of these issues we have to work through. As I mentioned before, states. I mean, we view them again as co-regulatory partners in these pesticide decisions. So we often consult with our state lead agencies for input on these decisions. But key is when we want our decisions, we want to make sure they can be implemented and they're enforceable. So it's key to have their input in these areas. We also have a tribal pesticide council that we interact with for input and to make sure that our work is not negatively affecting tribal lands. International work. Again, I'll touch on that a little bit too, is that it is important. I mean, one of the main areas that we spend time on is in the international areas is to make sure there's harmonization of our decisions, and in particular to minimize trade barriers and making sure that our tolerances or MRLs are harmonized as best we can as well. And we, in those areas, we realize it's critical. We have both in the former NAFTA or USMCA now, we have joint reviews with mainly with Canada, but sometimes with other countries as well to make sure our decisions are again, harmonized and, that we're reaching similar decisions based on the similar methodologies. So I know I kind of sped through it a little bit here. I know I'm trying to leave a little more time for Ed because he's a few more things to wrap up. So happy to answer any questions at the end. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So I'll go through these individual issues a little bit quickly so we have some time for questions, being sensitive of time. So Endangered Species Act is an area that we discussed. We've had a lot of movement. So the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, codified some work that we needed to do within the interagency work groups. So there was working groups established, interagency committee at a high level to address the issues of how FIFRA intersected with ESA. And then we talked about sort of how we do our assessments. We can try to find that there's no effect on pesticide applications where we would not need to consult with the other federal agencies on the services. We can undertake a not likely to adversely affect where there's informal consultation, and then there's a likely to adversely affect, and where there's a formal consultation with the services, and the services will issue what's called a BIOP. So EPA issues a BE, which is an effects determination, the biological evaluation, and we get sued, and we're on a schedule to issue a number of BEs. In fact, we issued one a couple of weeks ago for atrazine. Keep your newspaper open for a BE that's coming out on glyphosate. So some of the big ticket chemicals, in addition to completing registration review, will have a biological evaluation that we will then coordinate with the services. So we issued not only the BE, but in a memorandum of understanding on ESA, but also we put out new standards and new procedures for how we're going to conduct and do our BEs, which included the ability for the agency to consider usage data, right? So if there is a pesticide, and rather than saying this pesticide will be applied everywhere across the country, and so it's harder for us to show and demonstrate that it's not going to impact, we're going to look at usage data to say, you know what, this pesticide is only really used in this area, so that we're saying that there's probably not going to be an effect or not likely to affect an endangered species. So there's a National Academy of Science report framework that we work through, and we've also put out new methodologies this past year, so some successes in the ESA area. Pollinator work is also important to us. There's a huge pollinator website that EPA puts out. We just engaged in State of the Science on pollinators with a number of academics and other industry folks. So we're continuing to work on that. There's a slide for your takeaway to see all of the work that we did last year. And then plant incorporated protectants, PIPs that are substances that are produced in plants that are pesticides under the statute that we're implementing. We were trying to make it easier for people to use plant incorporated protectants where those PIPs could be formulated through conventional breeding. And so in the new State of the Science, where there's lots of potential genetic manipulation of the plant, which equates to increased yields, which also can equate to reduced pesticides, how are we going to address that? So we put out some new approaches on PIPs. And then the administrator's goal of reducing animal testing. And we've had a number of meetings, and we've reduced the number of tests. If we've got models that are able to demonstrate the science rather than having to repeat tests over and over again, if we're looking at toxicological endpoints that are very consistent and well known, we're willing to reduce the amount of animals that need to be tested and killed in the name of science, which is important. And we need to continue to do that. But are there ways that we're looking at our portfolio to see if we're doing it in a way that's strategic and also reducing the impact to animals for testing? So with that, we have ended the presentation, hopefully, and also take some questions now.
Great. Thank you, both Ed and Michael. I think I wish we had more time to ask you guys questions. I know you have to get on to another meeting, but I think if it's possible, we'll take some questions now. First of all, Ed, I will start. I didn't know that you came from Chicago in the beginning of your career, so I have the most controversial question. Are you a Cubs fan, or were you when you lived in Chicago?
Yeah, I live next to the stadium, so by osmosis, I became a Cubs fan. And when they backed into a World Series one year, and people realized that, I ran outside my door to go get tickets because we knew the ticket, and the entire city of Chicago was running through the streets up to Cubs Wrigley Field, and it was kind of a fun experience.
Fantastic. Well, I was raised by a diehard Cubs fan, so we appreciate that in my family. All right. First question here we have from Don Brown.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation today. Really enjoyed it. I wish all Americans could see what you're telling us today. I don't think we'd have issues with the perceptions of pesticides. A question I have is, and this is one that we hear out there in the world, if the registrant is providing all the data, how do you confirm, in fact, that data is accurate, or it's just not a self-fulfilling prophecy and it works out for them?
Yeah, great question. So the registrants aren't the only ones providing all the data.
Perfect.
And so we get data from academics, the weed scientists, all the university work, peer-reviewed published papers. We take all of the science into account. The other reason why we know that the registrant data is appropriate is the Good Laboratory Practices program, where those laboratories are inspected, the contract labs that are doing the work for the registrants, to make sure that there are adequate procedures and protocols in place. And there have been examples where they didn't have those in place and they pay a fine. And there was a famous criminal case that the agency brought a number of years ago where there were some data manipulations that were occurring. And so we have checks and balances related to making sure that the data is appropriate and that we to rely on our decisions for. And there's so much data for any one chemical over so many years, it would really be hard for somebody to kind of fudge the numbers. But I'm going to say, if it happens, we've got inspection authorities.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, just as I mentioned before, I think kind of like what Ed mentioned, it was like we receive all the raw data from that. And so you can imagine, and we go through every single piece of that. So it's really hard to fake something, to be honest with you. I would say that there have been scenarios, there have been attempts, and we're able to pick up on it. So,
well, certainly in any industry, there's attempts. But
yeah.
My next question would be, how much more difficult is it now to register a product? Of course, more extensive work, but would you say there are more hurdles than there were 20 years ago? I assume so.
Yeah, Mike's probably in a better position to answer that. But when you think about pollinators, for example, you can do a bee colony study, which can cost $500,000.
Yes.
Knowing that we can keep doing science, right, for science sake, trying to marry it up with a decision is important. So we make sure we do that. We try to make sure we're tiering studies. So let's look at a sort of screening study as a first step. And if we don't see anything that needs to be investigated further, let's kick it out and we're good to go. Okay, we see something here at tier 1. All right, let's look at tier 2. And then, so that's sort of how the science progresses. But Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, along those lines too, it's like, you're absolutely right. Certain issues, just like I was saying, under registration review, there may be issues now that we didn't think about before. But to balance it out on the other side is what Ed was talking about, the alternative methods. Based on years of data, we're able to look at some of these studies and say, if you have this set of information, it's probably adequate to cover these other areas. And so we're looking at in areas where we may no longer need as robust a data set because other areas we think will cover it adequately. So, we're trying to make, again, we're trying to cover
balance it.
Sense, right?
Balance it. One other question, then I'll let somebody else have the floor real quick. And this is an inappropriate question in the sense because there isn't a good answer for it, but what does it typically cost for a new soybean or corn herbicide from start to finish for a registrant to be able to say, okay, we're going to give it to our wholesale guys?
Yeah, so CropLife has some numbers on these.
So tell us their numbers then.
Yeah.
3 million.
Yeah, I know. I've a food crop, an external food crop, whatever. I mean, we generally hear from industry, the R&D, the years of development. It's not just doing the data, but it's their entire R&D program is in the order of $200 to $300 million.
Yep.
What I heard.
Range.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's the number. And that accounts for like eliminating all of the misstarts and mistakes and narrowing it to that one chemical, right?
Right.
Yes, just to get it. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentations today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, sir.
Lauren, can I ask a question?
Yes. So, Chairman, we'll allow it.
Gentlemen, we've been charged by the EPA administrator to give feedback on how can EPA create a holistic pesticide program for the future. I guess my question to you is, what do you see as maybe places where we can streamline, improve, can continue to protect human health and the environment, but at the same time try to streamline the process to bring more products to market and serve our producers' needs as well?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you taking that on. And I think it's not an easy answer, right?
I don't think we had a choice.
Okay, well, great. Here's some feedback. I know the administrator is very concerned about the risk communication piece of this. And I think even the comments of today, it's sort of if the American people just knew, right? So I think part of that is risk communication, right? I think a piece of that. I think a piece of that is the science and working with industry to streamline the science reviews. And we have a number of projects in-house within OPP. We are a lean organization, meaning a lean management organization where folks are using lean principles to make sure there's efficacy in the system, and there's no waste in the system. We're only requiring the studies we need to require. So it's, for me, the biggest part of where we suffer is the messaging piece on the risk communication, and where we can improve the process. So something that has a 21st century feel is going to tackle the science and the communication piece. That's just my own 2 cents, but I think I'm looking forward to understanding sort of the outlines of this from the administrator, and to what creative ideas are out there. I think you guys are in a great position to sort of understand, where do we need to, where are there sort of inefficiencies and mechanisms that we need to improve upon. And we're all ears. I think that's why we're here. We want to listen and feedback from the folks that are, out there in the field. Mike, anything to add?
No, you've heard me talk about this too. I think the risk communication is a real challenge for us. It's hard because it's all about public trust. I think we just described the process and how we have a lot of checks and balances. We're not doing it alone. We're interacting with all kinds of international bodies out there and making sure the science is right. And it's really, really hard to say where people have to understand and accept our outcomes when every 30 minutes they're hearing a commercial about some law firm, saying, have you been exposed to this? You may have cancer, and so on and so forth. And it's hard to challenge that. And I see that every day. I talk to my neighbors around here, and we have all the same conversations. So it's I think for us, that's an area where we really need to I think take a highly innovative approach in better communicating the work that we do and the robustness of the science. Yeah.
I know Graciela's got a question. I want to just follow up on that. I guess concerning the communication piece, number one, these are highly technical discussions that it's hard to probably dumb down to the level where I can understand it. The other part is it even maybe ethical for EPA to be the ones doing the communication? I'd just like your thoughts on that. Should there be someone else, or is it just the fact that EPA needs to communicate in a different manner to get this information to the public?
We can do a better job of resonating with the American public and growers and the NGOs on the work that we're doing. Obviously what we're doing right now is potentially not meeting the bar, and then that's in the environment of sort of government trust in general, and then how we're doing our science. And I think we are the right agency to do that. But I think where we're educating all of our stakeholders around that, then the message gets amplified. And we're, right. So this part of it is sort of, seeking to educate. So that I was almost going to say, the takeaway from us today is lots of smart people who care about getting tools to growers, where the science leads them for protection, they sometimes need to take products off the market as a result. And so there's times where we do that, and we hear the voices from growers to say, why are you doing this? We really need this product. But knowing that there are times we need to do that, and being on the same page, and knowing that you're trusting the fact that we've really looked at some hard science to make that decision, I think is kind of a takeaway from me.
Thank you.
All right. I think our final question comes from Graciela then, if you have a moment.
Yes, good afternoon. Could you talk a little bit about the role of the program, the pesticide program, informing the EPA the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, water quality standards and regulations.
Yes, so when we do an evaluation, so on the environmental side, right, and the human health side, there are drinking water standards. We have lots of models that go into how much consumption of this particular pesticide or chemical in the diet is problematic. So we have many, many drinking water models that apply to many different topographical areas across the country, right? Florida is a very different groundwater issue or drinking water issue than Arizona per se, right? So we have lots of models that cover sort of regional differences as well. There are MCL levels that are set for a number of pesticides in drinking water, and our Office of Research and Development and our Office of Water and our pesticide office coordinate on making sure that the data is similar, and we're doing our risk assessments. We're trying to make sure we're using the most current science and the standards there. There's lots of water monitoring that occurs in the states to say, are we seeing hits of this pesticide, right? And in some cases there are aquifers that are impacted, but in many, in the majority of cases, there are no hits or no detects for many of these pesticidal chemical substances. So in some respects, we're doing a very good job of protecting aquifers, waterways, and drinking water. And that is definitely part of the analysis that we do on the human health and the environmental side to determine whether the levels that we expect to occur from the maximum use of this label, used in accordance with the label, will have no impact on human health or the environment. Mike, anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's, we're trying to be careful not through our regulatory decisions, we're not creating another environmental problem somewhere else. And again, as Ed mentioned, we have these standards, we have these methods that we work with, and we coordinate with the other agencies. But as Ed mentioned too, there are ongoing monitoring programs out there, and I think that's one of the areas, like in a registration review. If something is not coming out the way we had anticipated based on our analysis, and you're getting hits that are unexpected, we have a mechanism to go back and reevaluate that chemical and make appropriate changes as necessary. So,
yeah, and atrazine was a good example of that. The monitoring program that was put in place to make sure, because the risk cup was so narrow related to drinking water, we had additional monitoring that we required as part of the label. And the monitoring occurred for a number of years, and it seems like it's worked out. So we're thinking about sort of reducing that, pulling that back. But an example of where we want to make sure this product is available to farmers and growers. There was a risk of concern associated with drinking water. Okay, let's monitor it and make sure it's okay.
All right. I know we have a couple more questions, but I do think that we're at the end of our time here. Chairman, would you like to take it from here?
Yep, that'd be fine. Ed and Mike, thank you all so much. You've been very helpful today. Our pesticide presentations have just been outstanding. I really appreciate it. We are about 15 minutes late for our break. Let's go ahead and take our break. We'll be back at 4 o'clock and have the committee discussion on this, and then we'll go into our wrap up and closing remarks for the day. So, gentlemen, thank you. And
thank
with
you
that,
so much.
we'll take a 15-minute break.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello and welcome back to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Farm, Ranch, and Rural Communities Advisory Committee meeting. This is the final session. If you're just joining us for the first time today, there's a tech support link right above the video player, and this will be archived up at the FRRCC site after this event is over. I'll now turn it over to the FRRCC Chair, Mr. Tom McDonald. Tom?
Thanks, Dave. Welcome back to our final session of our two-day meeting. Looking at our timeline, we're at the top of the hour. We went a little bit over on the last session, but since we don't have public comments today, no one has signed up for public comment. I would like to take our discussion from 4 o'clock to 4:40, and we'll have a hard stop at 4:40. At that time, I want to review the timeline one more time with the committee, and then we'll go into our wrap up and closing remarks. So with that, Lauren, I'll turn the floor over to you to have our committee discussion on the pesticides charge topic.
You bet. Thank you, Tom. I hope everyone can hang with us for just a little bit longer. I think Tom is right with the comments that he made. Those speakers were fantastic, and I'm glad that we got to see more than just the EPA side of what they do. We also got to hear about the USDA sides. I was not as familiar with that until very recently. So just a reminder, we're kind of focusing our discussion here in this work group in the 3 areas. And the first was, how can we help EPA reduce barriers to bring crop protection tools to market while thinking about all the things that we just covered, protecting the environment and our natural resources, human health, pollinators, and endangered species. And we heard a little bit about what they do currently. And so just thinking about additional barriers, things like that. The second bucket that we wanted to focus on and get some discussion around was how can EPA improve consumer confidence and build trust with the American public? We heard about that and we offered thoughts already on that. But really, I kind of think that one of the final comments that Ed had there was in response to Tom's comment on he felt like they could do at EPA a better job of resonating with the public and NGOs and all others. And that they felt like they were up to that challenge. So it seems like that it is ripe for us providing some very good feedback on that. And I have some thoughts on that too, but I kind of want to see where the group is headed. And then the final focus was really that how can we help EPA build trust with the international trading partners? We heard a little less about that, but So maybe naturally we're kind of leaning toward the dissecting the first 2, but we can still welcome some comments on that latter part. So I will stop talking and see if we have some comments out of the gate here. If you do have a comment to share, please raise your hand by hitting the button. And I believe Gary is the winner at the first comment. So Gary, when you have a moment, please speak up.
Well, just quickly, after listening to Cheryl from USDA, she's an amazing woman, and I think it would help a lot if she could chime in publicly for the USDA. A lot of times people don't believe that the EPA because, they say, well, hey, we're doing a great job. Well, of course you think you're doing a great job. You're the one doing it. But if USDA, a separate agency, could chime in and advocate more for the EPA, I think that would help. As far as the consumer confidence piece.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jeff, I believe you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I would agree exactly with what Gary said. I think the more people we have showing confidence, the more professional type groups showing confidence in the EPA will help. But the comment that I wanted to make was related to the communication piece that Ed talked about at the end. And I think that there's a little miscommunication involved with some of the EPA's messages. We heard through their whole presentation that the companies supply the data. And then right towards the end, when he was talking about that a little bit more, he mentioned the good laboratory practices and the fact that a lot of the data is coming from contracted labs. The companies themselves aren't doing these studies themselves. They're not generating the data. They're contracting with an independent lab that's doing all of those studies. And I think that message that the EPA portrays, that the data is coming from the companies, is a little misleading and to the general public. I think they could gain a lot of momentum just by, being a little more transparent about exactly where the data comes from. It's not the companies doing a lot of the studies. It's independent contractors that are doing it.
Thank you for that. Jesse?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I was thinking about the way that the federal government, who gets access to ad council money. You know, we hear these advertisements from the ad council, quote unquote. I also think about public health initiatives. There have been concerted efforts in the past to all but stamp out smoking. You know, to what degree is this a priority for the country to try to help people understand safe food and available food? And is there any access that EPA or any of the federal agencies have around this area?
That's a very creative, different thought that I had not thought about. While we wait for another hand, and feel free to raise, the one thing I'm thinking about too is that timeline that they covered. So, I mean, a lot of us who work in environmental issues are really familiar with the long, drawn out nature of an issue. But I think when you're looking at 4-6 years plus for a process to carry through on registration, and then 15 years later you re-register, I mean, the time horizon is very long. And so, you know, multiple points for public participation, but the public has moved on to something else, you know, and so at each time I'm sure it feels daunting if you work for the, you know, for EPA to have to remind the public of the process and what you've already done on that one product. But it can quickly probably come out of the memory of the general public and is probably prone to some misinformation at each of those points along. So that's something that I can sympathize with them. And I feel like we probably need to help them figure that out when the process is a legitimate process, but it takes a long time to work through. Barry?
Yeah, Lauren, thank you. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in, and it's on part of what Jesse was touching on and expound on some thoughts that I had. But the talk that Cheryl did, she mentioned something that caught my attention, and it was that the general public trusts farmers. And when you have that farmer trust and you're trying to gain trust for the EPA for chemical pesticide certifications and things like that, what better mechanism to tie in farmers with them using the product and the trust between EPA and producers to put that product on the ground and do it at the required rates and the label. Some way spinning off of that or building upon that concept that, you know, knowing people trust farmers, that farmers trust the work that's being done out there, and they wouldn't put those chemicals on their crops and their life, you know, and maybe tying some of that stuff together to get the public perception, you know, towards more of acceptance. So I kind of threw that out there to also spur on some more talk. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I actually saw that announcement. That actually came out yesterday. It was a national public opinion poll from American Farm Bureau. So if you're interested, I think the information is on American Farm Bureau's website. But a majority of U.S. adults, and sorry, I'm reading off the press release, say that they do have a positive view of farmers' sustainability practice, with an overwhelming majority trusting farmers. And so that was a survey of 2,200 U.S. adults, and it kind of breaks it up into a bunch of different areas, but it is food supply being one of them. So I found that interesting that she referenced that data point as well. Any other thoughts just on those topics? You know, some discussion points before we move on to the other hands raised. I don't want to kill discussions.
Lauren, this is Amy Wolf. I'd wanted to piggyback on that if I may. Mm-hmm. So I think what it what the issue then raises for me goes back to one of the conversations that we had in our earlier meeting, which is what is the communication strategy currently undertaken by EPA relative to how they explain this process? Because I am struggling. I saw that announcement yesterday by AFBF, and I'm struggling with what is obviously a significant disconnect in the consumers' minds, or at least the couple thousand that they surveyed. That is, you trust farmers and trust them from a sustainability perspective. Do you not make the connection that they then use pesticides as a necessary part of what they do? And so how do we have incredible trust in that group and then have the serious issues that we have relative to consumers' attitudes around pesticides, around what EPA does to protect consumers relative to allowing pesticide use? So to me, it circles back to, I need more information to know what is already being done to try to influence consumers from a positive perspective around this entire process. I mean, it's an incredibly valuable point that it's not, Syngenta did not make up that data. They used a third party for the production of that data relative to that product. And so I need more information. I need more data, because now I feel like I'm getting even more conflicting information around, for the original stewards of the land. And it now looks like a sample set of people agrees with that. How do they then have such a harsh view of the use of these tools that allow us to produce that food and be the trustworthy, honest, individuals that we are? So it leads to me more questions than answers.
I think you identified some spaces for our work group to continue to have additional speakers come in and dive. So thank you for that. Dave Graybill?
Yeah, I'm a dairy farmer, but 20 years ago I was an ag teacher. So I have training in teaching, and I listened to those smart folks talking. I mean, Cheryl was passionate about what she was doing, and so was Ed and Michael. And if you can get that passion into a story for people, they listen and they understand. And ag, American Farm Bureau and Pennsylvania Farm Bureau have done a great job of getting the ag story into the classroom, especially the elementary classroom. And American Farm Bureau has done it very well with books, children's books. Has the EPA looked at making any children's stories out of their work? I mean, it's vital work to the food supply. And like Barry and Amy were saying, the connection between what farmers do with that product to produce the cheap and safe and abundant food supply we have a great story to tell. So we just have to have somebody that's a individual that can put that story together, because those are unique individuals that write children's books and illustrate them. So that might be one way we can help this story be told.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Lauren, just quickly, I think it would be pretty cute if you had a commercial that showed someone going into McDonald's, and when they get the bill, it's $30 just to get a hamburger and a Coke, and then have them go, no, I can't afford it, and walk out, and then just put a sign on the bottom that would say, this is what would happen without pesticides.
Anybody have thoughts on that? Graciela, would you like to comment next?
Sure. I would like to touch another angle that I've been sort of bringing since we started meeting, which is related to what happened at the state level, but mostly at the community level. I think that for some reason, many strategies of EPA and programs don't percolate to the local level. I was not happy with the answer of Anna about the they cannot do anything about the local regulation because in many areas, the most important phase in terms of environmental protection is EPA and the local program. And the local it can be delegated or it can be run by EPA itself. And mostly those programs, they make emphasis in enforcement and inspection activities, and they don't couple their role with the education of the people. So, so people don't get to get informed by the same program that is regulating them about all the background that goes into whatever they're doing. And that creates a big divide because then the regulators that are seen as the enemy or the contrary. And I think that has to do with all history because in the 90s, EPA tried to change the culture of the agency from governmental legal to collaborative. And I think that didn't get all the way down. So the face of EPA is in at the very local small community or municipality is more of a guard rather than somebody that comes supposedly to help. And I think that's an area also to discuss and review, because I think that not all the states, the regulations are enforced by the state, rather by the same EPA program. And they do have the ability to work with the local program to help changing that face of policemen or enforcing.
Thank you for that. I think that same sentiment came up, seems like a long time ago now, but in our water discussion as well, sort of at the many facets where the public, the regulated public would interface with EPA or its delegated program, that sentiment of compliance assistance rather than a sole focus on enforcement, particularly as it connects with agricultural community. If the ultimate goal is to benefit the environment, I think we're seeing some high level thoughts there. So hopefully that'll be reflected in our notes. And as work groups, we can really spend some time thinking about the best approach, knowing that they are a regulator, there is a job to do, but there's also an approach to being effective. And it doesn't necessarily cost more money or take additional resources, but it's about the effectiveness of those resources. So, maybe the groups can kind of dissect that across a couple of our platforms here. Jimmy, I think you might be next.
Well, we kind of moved on, but that's okay. One of the things that I got to thinking about, we talked about relationships out here in the country and with the public, and I guess the real question that I have is maybe EPA doesn't have to be that department that goes out and does that, but through their other agencies, USDA, FDA, others that may be more suited to get the science out. I mean, I don't guess we necessarily have to have, EPA at the forefront of this effort, but I think that they can certainly have those relationships where there's other entities, whether it's federal, state, or even local, that they can say, hey, this is the science, let us help you succeed in what you're trying to do. We believe in what you're trying to do. And you may have better resources than EPA to do that, to make that communication. And so I don't know that EPA has to be the end all, do all to bring everything to market. I think that we talked a lot about farmers making messages, and one of the things I used to say to Extension, I said, your best bet to get someone to adopt a new practice out here in the country is to find another farmer doing exactly what you want them to do, and let's stand them up and let them talk about it. And that resonates with the local people and people that are being regulated. I think that works in just about any kind of model. So I think that there could be some internal things that they could be doing better as far as communication, but maybe they look to other entities that are doing it already and help them get the science out.
Great points. I was thinking about what Cheryl said during her discussion on the team that she has and the different resources at USDA, and I think one of them, she referenced science communicators, people who that's what they know how to do very well, and is to communicate and break down that information. And maybe that's what our work group can spend a little bit more time doing, is trying to figure out where are those people? What is their role inside EPA for the different sectors of audiences that would be interested in pesticides? Even Ed kind of referenced several different stakeholder groups that they would be communicating with regularly. But yeah, I think that is a great point, and somewhere where we can do a little bit deeper of a dive. Jesse?
Yeah, Lauren, I was just going to mention that, first of all, I think it's going to be a selling point to convince agriculture and remind agriculture that EPA can be their partner. And I give this administration credit and this committee and staff credit for that, the fact that it exists, because that's not necessarily something that's ground truthed or appreciated. On the other hand, I would also say that, is there a point where agriculture is willing to let go of a product? Are we going to self-police at some point and say that there's not a chemistry that should advance? Can trust be built? And are there, to some degree, willing partners in the quote unquote environmental community that are willing to have that conversation?
Thank you for that. Barry?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Just one more comment. I think Grace Yellow is on, Grace Yellow is on a path here and kind of touched on some ideas that I wanted to finish up with. And Jesse just mentioned a few things as well. But the trust there that I think Jesse was talking about, a lot of stuff that I do with the Watershed Project and the Watershed Program over here is breaking down walls, breaking down those barriers, breaking down those walls so that we can talk face to face and talk real. And it's not hiding behind a certain word or little facts or, just little things that never want to be discussed. I think we got to break that barrier down. And I think this stems from a history. I remember growing up, back in the late 70s and stuff, EPA was not looked at as a very nice institution. It was perceived by my uncle, my dad, which were farming at the time, as bad. They don't let us do anything, and they're going to tell us not to do anything and not let us do what we want to do, and it's going to kill us. So it's just a bad rap, I think, that was painted back in those days. And it's really not the case. It's having to work with everyone and, come up with a solution that works for everybody with this stuff. And I think there needs to be an endorsement there or a rekindled conversation between the different agencies and producer groups, or producers for that matter, with EPA to straighten that whole thing out, because it really hasn't been done. But I still think that it's looked at as a negative thing, as Graciela mentioned, and maybe that's a starting point. I mean, to repair what was done years ago. Thank
Those
you.
are excellent points. Yeah, excellent points. I like the word rekindled. I think we have to figure out a way to use that again. I mean, we're all either represent farmers and talk to them every day, or we are in fact farmers, and that sentiment is still, very real. And you can read things, and then what you experience in real life kind of guides the way that you think about whatever. But I do believe, and I hope that you all agree, and I hope that the folks listening understand how important this committee is to just, one piece of that rekindling and repairing. And it's not a one and done kind of thing. It's just a continuous effort to listen and to dialogue. So I hope that all those listening understand the importance of the committee. I think that kind of feeds off of Jesse's points as well. Jeanette, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I got a couple comments. So the first is back to what Amy was saying. We do need to dig a little deeper into the data, because I will tell you, in dealing with consumers, they like small farmers, organic farmers. But when you get into corporate ag, that's where the trust, I think, starts to wane. And the problem is they don't understand corporate ag, for the most part, is still family farms. They're only incorporated because of, the tax or liability issues. So there's that. The second thing, what Jesse was saying, whereas I agree with that in concept, getting rid of some pesticides, the problem that we have is there's, as a farming community, it's hard to build consensus among ourselves. Even here in our state of California, we grow 400 different crops. So what one person needs, someone in the Midwest doesn't even know what it is and doesn't care. So, I mean, you have to be careful when you divide the industry as a whole. Third, I have been working with advocacy groups for 20 years in regards to trying to train them to be an advocate for the industry and going on social media platforms and talking about pesticides and water and all these other issues. The problem that you run into is that this is very complex. We just had this great presentation today, and it's probably going to take us a couple days to process all of it. So they might be willing, if we give them talking points, they may be willing to go out there and say a few things. But then when social media, these trolls just come down on them, we've all had it happen to us, then they're back off. That's it. That's enough. I can't do this. They feel like, they don't have the help. And they've tried to set up some, the industry has tried to set up some helplines where people can call and say, I'm getting this question, how do I respond? Because these are just farmers' wives, maybe, or, students. They're all at different areas of expertise on the subject. So it's like, I feel like asking farmers to do it, or using ag in the classroom, or our local farm bureaus. I think we've done that. We've tried to do that. I think there needs to be a coordinated sort of, I won't say PR program, but there needs to be something. And some of the basics, simple components, like what we were talking about one of our first meetings. Everybody keeps saying out here, oh, we need to be like Denmark. We need to be like France. And it's like, no, they don't base their pesticide policy on science. It's based upon an agenda, and it's political. And that's like, if once we get over that first key, I think we have to define several key points where we could actually get over the fear that is in people's mind about this, that the other people who are advocating for another agenda has instilled into them, so that we can get back to some sort of normalcy. And I'm sorry, I'll come off my soapbox, but I have dealt with this for many years, and that is one of my greatest frustrations.
Thank you, Jeanette. Matt, I think you have maybe a coffee cup up instead of a hand, so I didn't know what that was. So give me 1 minute. I do think that we are, and I don't even know how you did that, but that is impressive. So I hope you tell us how you got a coffee cup up there. But Jeanette, I want to follow up. So I think what I'm hearing are some themes on, farmer trust, but some disconnects in the awareness, even in the farming community, of this incredibly robust process. I mean, our farmers and, our communities that we work for and alongside are not the entomologists and the risk assessment managers at EPA. So we can't be expected by the public to defend a process in every nook and cranny of the process. But we are that end user of the product that comes through that. So I certainly hear what you're saying, and I have felt it before personally, and I'm sure many on the group have too. So we need to as a group continue to go through that. Matt, if you have a moment now, and you can, sorry to ignore you.
Yeah, no problem. I for some reason can't get past a cup, but whatever. It was supposed to be a hand. I'm thinking about BST. I don't know if you guys remember when New England was having a real issue with bovine scomotic trophin, which is the you can give a cow a shot and get a little more milk, and it's actually not a bad product. It worked really well. It made a lot of money for farms, but the public screamed about it. And what really made it horrible was that the farmers started fighting each other about it. And the same thing happens with, I don't remember, Alar way back when, and the apple farms up in Washington State basically devastated that industry. And it was farmers fighting against farmers. And what's the public to think? So, and I don't know if we're ever going to change that, because we're an independent group of people and we all have opinions, and that makes it difficult. But, it really is the relationships we have with the EPA or USDA or FDA, and trying to work together. Somehow we have to get a calm voice to help to move past distrust. And that's what I think happens.
Lauren, you're on mute.
Sorry. Dang it. I almost made it through the whole day without doing that. I think we could probably have some additional discussions of the role of social media in that, in and of itself, of the ag sort of back and forth debate on whatever product or whatever issue. There's probably, it probably doesn't help in that setting either. Amy, do you have some thoughts?
I do. Barry said something that made my train of thought come back to, Jeanette and I were having a spirited, it sucks to be in California conversation as we were going into the break. But it does bear an important element to all of this, which is the role that the states play and their authority to then implement even more strict regulations than what the Environmental Protection Agency has in place. And how do we add yet another layer? And to me, that's a layer of complexity in our discussions, because, in the land of fruit and nuts out here, we have this tendency to take that freedom and really run with it. And then other states, New York, Washington, pick up on the idea and say, oh, we're going to take a little piece of what California did. We're going to take a little piece of what California did. And we're going to create our own new set of regulation. Again, that layers above and beyond what EPA is doing. And so I feel like in particular, relative to product registration or to when products are taken away from us, right? Our state is on a much faster track to eliminate a whole host of products in addition to what they've already taken away, that it's just adding layers of complexity that I feel like, our farmers' hands are literally tied to a place that, regardless of what's happening at the federal level, it's almost moot. And I don't say that to be dismissive, but just because California's pendulum has swung so far in a direction. And so what role does that play in this? And by not addressing it, I feel like to some level we'll appear tone deaf, because you do have a number of us live in and represent states who are taking their right to regulate beyond the federal government literally and very seriously. And so where does that interaction between US EPA with state counterparts in the charge that the administrator has given us, how does that play into it? I think it's going to be yet another important element that we can't forget in our discussions.
I very much agree. And as a Midwesterner, I have never said that I would never want to live in California. Just teasing. We say it every day in Illinois. I think that is real no matter where our people are living. We're all living in different parts of our country. These programs are coming through the lens of our local delegated program, and that adds complications, just the patchwork, if nothing else, but those states that add additional restrictions. So I think that is definitely an important and a complicating factor. The other thing I was, sorry.
I just wanted to piggyback what Amy was saying, because seriously, we have some commodity groups that, for example, they've taken away fumigants. There's what they allowed us to use is not working. Let's just put it that way. And no other crop protection company is making a replacement because, we can't use it. And so there's issues with the soil, yields are dropping. It could really hurt an industry. And additionally, with rodenticides too, we have huge citrus groves out here. We have huge avocado groves, and they have rats in them, folks. I hate to tell you, but and when we have fires, we had a fire in Thompson Fire in Ventura County. They had to light a backfire, and all the rats were fleeing, and they caught them. They burned thousands of rats. We have got to have these tools, or we're going to have public health issues, and they can't just keep being taken away. Plus, us in Florida have the most invasive species. The reason we had 4 million acres of wood burn is because we had a beetle come over on a wood pallet from China, and it's invasive. We have incredible bugs that are huge, and we need these products. And so I think that has to be addressed somehow, because there's no border around California. It's this invasive species are going to exit and go to the rest of the states. Now I'm done. Thank you.
I do think we're hitting on another point as well, and it's the same theme that I think a lot of us have been hearing across all of our issues, and it's certainty and the predictability of what's happening here. And so, even last night I was speaking with one of our county farm bureaus, and the thing that our farmers are most worried about is exactly what you're saying, losing the tools that they have and losing them in a way that is fast, and they have no option that's as effective or that's even available. And so that's not just a fear, it is happening, and they're watching it happen to other commodities, other industries. And I think it is that certainty there. So, you did hear Ed talk earlier about how sometimes that's what at least at the federal level, that's what they have to do. That's where the science is leading them. But they do have that one image that showed all of the arrows pointing to their decision making. And sometimes it is stakeholder input. And so maybe that's what we could, as a work group, kind of unpackage and think about the role of stakeholders on, if it's not going to work anymore, what is the plan for something else coming in its place, or a phase out, or whatever, instead of that immediate urgency and change at the farm gate level. But I am hearing that one loud and clear from these discussions. Jesse?
Well, don't misunderstand me. I mean, it's cute for me to introduce the idea of thinking about what chemistry we would want to get rid of until it comes to atrazine and sorghum. So what I'm trying to say is EPA is going to get sued. And we're sitting here in this environment trying to help move agriculture forward and in a positive direction, and trying to figure out how to make a pesticide program that communicates better. but I think it's more than that. I guess my overall argument there is some self-policing or some amount of accountability among agriculture on, can we have good faith partners? Can we be good faith partners? I think we are. I think there's a lot of almost all scientifically driven products that are part of the system, but it can't just be a sales pitch. I'm very interested.
Jesse, I want to believe you, but I've also had my office egged, my windows broke, my car slashed because I have a license plate on it that supports ag in the back. So you have to understand, there's a group of people out there that this issue is they're very strong about. And so, I mean,
I understand that, but if I read the charge topic correctly, it has at least 3 subpoints. Yeah. And it is, first of all, very clearly ag focused. And I get that, and that's why I'm part of it. I imagine that's why most of us are part of it. But it's a struggle to figure out how to square this circle.
I agree.
Lauren, I hate to cut off the discussion, but we're at a point where we need to move on. I appreciate you and the pesticide work group for taking on this challenge. This is a huge issue, and one that it's going to take a while to wrestle with. I don't want to miss in our notes the ESA consultation piece of this being what I heard EPA saying was one of their biggest barriers to bringing more products to market, and I know that's not in EPA's bag, but I think going on record is, saying that some of those efforts are duplicative. I think that's worth the committee digging into a little bit. So thank you all so much for your time today. As I said before, the speakers were outstanding, and I look forward to seeing the products of your work down the road. Y'all got a real challenge. Real quick, I just wanted to share the work plan that I discussed on yesterday. Let's see, can y'all see that on the screen? No. Is it the work plan?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to give you a chance to give input on this. I know after the last 2 days, it may not seem feasible, but this is kind of the time that we have to work with. Is there anything on the list that the work group would suggest we do differently, mainly from a timeline standpoint? I think it's kind of logical flow, but I'd certainly entertain any discussion from a timeline standpoint, and if you think there's ways to make this more workable. So just to go through this again, by December the 15th, Rebecca she thinks she can have a SharePoint site available. By the 1st of March, try to have the issues identified, and then at least one draft letter for committee deliberations at the spring meeting. And then by July, have all of our advice letters in draft form. September, and I'm saying September because there will be a fall meeting. I don't know the date yet, but at least by the fall meeting, we need to have all of our advice letters ready for the committee to review, deliberate, and hopefully have final adoption. And if there becomes a point in here where we need to get together as a full committee and bring everybody along, bring everybody up to speed, again, is very possible that we could have another virtual meeting along the way, and then have our final product ready for a late 2021, early 2022 delivery to the EPA administrator. Is everybody okay with that approach? All right.
Nice and ambitious.
I have to say it is ambitious. After the last 2 days, it may be impossible. All right. Well,
I had a question for you. What was the deadline for that first bullet point where the SharePoint was starting on December 15th? Is there a close date on that, or is that?
No, that's just, Rebecca said, hopefully by then she can have that SharePoint site available. It'll be open for us for the whole time.
Oh, okay.
That's for the work groups to be able to edit documents together, have a repository for information and that kind of thing. All right. Well, I will give my closing remarks. I guess I just want to encourage the work groups to continue the dialogue. I encourage you to meet while this information is still fresh on your minds. I remind you again, you've been selected for this committee because you are an expert in your field. We need your advice to move the needle forward. There's an incredible amount of work still left to do, but I know that this group is up to the task. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "I do not believe there was ever a life more attractive than life on a cattle farm." And I have to agree with that, but replace cattle with pigs, chickens, corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, fruit, vegetables, whatever your commodity is. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are here. We're protecting, defending, and advancing a way of life, a culture, and a livelihood that is second to none. And not only that, we're providing food, fiber, and fuel to the United States and much of the rest of the world. I want to give a huge thank you to Jamie Burr, Matt Frond, and Lauren Lurkins, and all of the work groups for the exceptional work. I think our speakers the last 2 days have been exceptional, and we're much more equipped to do the work that's before us. I really appreciate Carrie and the work that she does on our behalf every day. And Carrie, I hope that you will pass along to the administrator and let him know that we appreciate the partnership that he's forged with agriculture. This administration has truly reached out to the agricultural community. You've made it a focus and a priority, and we appreciate that. As you may or may not know, our DFO, Hema Subramanian, recently had her first child with her husband, Ed. The baby girl is beautiful and healthy, and the family is doing great. And with Hema on maternity leave, Rebecca Perrin, who some of you may know from her role as a Region 8 Ag Advisor, has taken on the role of DFO, and she is doing an amazing job. Thank you, Rebecca, for working tirelessly to get us through today. Dr. Kanikas referred to her staff as rock stars, and I believe Hema and Rebecca are our rock stars. So ladies, thank you. Thank you for all that you've done to help us get to this point and give our committee the support that we so much need. Finally, I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas. Please stay safe and healthy this holiday season. To the members of the public that have persevered through our 2 days of meetings, thank you, and we appreciate your interest and time with us over the last couple of days. And at this time, I'll invite Carrie Meadows, the Ag Advisor to the EPA Administrator, to give her closing remarks.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you all for your robust discussion over the last 2 days. I've really enjoyed your discussion, and I hope it has helped you to identify the next steps that you need, or more information that you might need, or speakers you might need to hear from as your work group continues to advance the discussion and work that you're doing on these topics. I stand ready to help y'all as you identify more information that you need and to be a conduit to help you get the information that you need. I will repeat something that I said yesterday. We at EPA, we know your input and advice to the agency is incredibly valuable. That's one of the reasons we wanted to reinstate this committee and why we wanted to have Ag have a seat at the table in providing advice and recommendations to the agency. These are not easy topics, but it's why your voice for rural America is so important and why the administrator entrusted these topics to you. We want to help you to continue to feed the world, and I look forward to seeing your continued work on these issues. Like Tom, I would like to thank all of you for your service, all of the work group chairs, and especially want to thank Tom as the chair and Lauren as the vice chair, who I've gotten to work with a lot to get this meeting together, and who I'll continue to work with on the next steps. But thank you. I've really enjoyed being a partner with you all in this. Like to again thank our acting DFO, Rebecca, who's come in while Hema has gone on maternity leave and helped to make this meeting a success. And, thank the person who hasn't been here the last 2 days, Hema, who did all the work leading up to getting this committee reestablished. We're so lucky to have her. And also want to thank Megan Striegel and Emily Sila, who are both on the Ag team here at EPA, who have done some great behind the scenes work to make sure that this meeting can happen and to prepare for the next meetings that you guys might have. I just want to send a reminder or say a reminder to the public who might be watching that I hope that you've also enjoyed the discussion over the last 2 days, and maybe it's provided you something that you would like to communicate to the committee. You still have the ability to do that. You can provide a comment tonight until 11:59 at frrcc@epa.gov. Again, that's frrcc@epa.gov. And hearing from the public is incredibly valuable for the members and the agency as advice and recommendations are being considered. But again, I just want to thank you all for your service, for a great 2 days of conversation and discussion. And I look forward to working with you all in the next steps. So thank you. Tom, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. Appreciate your comments. And I'd like to now invite Rebecca Perrin, our designated federal officer, to give her closing information. Rebecca, you're on mute.
Long day. Thank you, Chairman McDonald. As a reminder, the meeting minutes from this meeting should be posted to the FRCC website within the required 90 days. However, we will be working to post presentations from this meeting, the recording of this meeting, also to that website as they become available. And any follow-up press inquiries should be directed to press@epa.gov. We'd be happy to answer those questions there. And then finally, I'd like to thank the 3 contractors who helped us to pull this off, pull off the Zoom call, and that's Kurt Ali, Dave Garvey, and Nathan West. So thank you very much for everything that you did behind the scenes on the technical piece. And thank you. That's all that I have, Chairman McDonald.
Thank you, Rebecca. I ditto our thanks to the technical team. You pulled it off flawlessly. Thank you very much. All right. I think we're at that point where I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So
Everybody jumped at once. Was that Matt that moved? Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Second by Amy Wolf. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Those that want to continue say nay. Motion carries. I wish everyone a healthy and happy holiday season. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone. Bye.
Happy holidays.